Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
We are live. It is Daily Faceoff Live, trade deadline edition, streaming on the DFO YouTube, and we are going to be with you for the next 4 hours, commercial-free, no geo-blocking, just straight deadline talk. And we have a great panel with us. Pete Blackburn's going to be stopping by. Nick Alberga, Matt Larkin will have the Players Room with Jay Rosehill and Mike McKenna. And of course, we will also have our guy, Frank Seravalli. You see him up in the corner in his insider cam. He'll be breaking down a ton of things, and we'll also be keeping an eye on our trade targets board, which you will see updating live at the bottom of your screen. Frank Seravalli is here. We are under 3 hours until the deadline, and his spot on the show is brought to you by Athletic Bruin. I got a handful of them right here, ready to crush them once the show ends, Frank. But we do have a little bit to talk about. The joke for the last couple of days has been, whoa, everything's happening, but you do still have your trade targets board going, and there still has been a little bit happening this morning. What can you tell us? What's maybe the biggest story you're watching over the next hour here?
Yeah, Tyler, the trade targets board has been decimated in recent days leading up to the trade deadline. 36 players that have appeared on our board at some point this season have already been traded, and we started the morning with 35 names still in play. We've had a couple trades that have developed in the first few hours of the morning. Nick Bonino, who was inside our top 10 to start the morning, was traded to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Jacob Vrana went from the Detroit Red Wings to the St. Louis Blues. We had a couple minor trades here in the last few minutes, and that was Curtis Lazar going to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for a fourth-round pick, going back to the Vancouver Canucks. And also Zach McEwen going from the Philadelphia Flyers to the Los Angeles Kings for Brendan Lemieux and a fifth-round pick. So that's sort of the latest on what's been happening this morning to this point before we went live. And what I have my eye on now, I've called this wild card week since Monday. After all those trades that went down, so many of the big name rentals that were off the board. And yes, there will be a bunch of depth pieces that move in between now and then. I'm looking at guys like James Van Riemsdyk, number 1 on our trade targets board. John Klingberg, number 2. I just reported in the last hour 2 of the teams I believe that have checked in on John Klingberg in the last number of days and weeks. That would be the Seattle Kraken and the Tampa Bay Lightning. But I call it wild card week because we don't know what else might happen in terms of players that have term on their deals. I'm talking about Kevin Hayes of the Philadelphia Flyers. They are willing to retain $2.5 million or more. They are motivated, I believe, to try and find a new home for Kevin Hayes before the 3 o'clock deadline today. Will it happen? I don't know. He's got 3 more years left on his deal, and there's a lot of teams that are either capped out, don't have room on their roster, or don't have the proper assets to make it work. But I think those conversations remain ongoing. Same thing with guys like Nick Schmaltz and Lawson Krause from the Arizona Coyotes. Further down our trade targets board in the 10 to 15 range, those are guys we've talked about previously. Arizona has been acquiring cap space. They traded for some contracts in Shea Weber and Jacob Voracek to set the table for potentially doing just about anything today, including trading out some major core pieces from their team if need be, if the prices remain high. I think everyone has been leery of the prices, with the guys that are remaining on the board now. We'll see how this all develops in the next 2 hours and 55 minutes, Tyler.
Frank, we will send you back up to your Athletic Brewing insider cam for the time being, but you got a hot mic the whole show, so you just pop that bad boy on and let us know when you have some news to break. We'll park Frank up in the corner there. I'll make sure I'm pointing to the right area. And let's do a little trip around the world and check in with a bunch of our analysts, starting with Pete Blackburn of Bally Sports. Pete, the joke again, like I kind of said to Frank, is that everything happened. There's nothing really going on, but maybe I'll float this your way. Who's a wild card team, to use Frank's term, that you're keeping an eye on today that you think could mix things up?
I'm curious about Carolina because Carolina's been relatively quiet. I know they got Jesse Puljujarvi, but like you look at the arms race in the Eastern Conference, and I don't think that they're necessarily keeping up to the degree that I expected them to. And I do think that they have some areas where they can still fill in and get stronger. And I've questioned their center depth, and I have been for a little bit. I don't know if Jesperi Kotkaniemi is a guy that I trust as your 2C down the stretch. So that's a team that I would look at and say, they're probably evaluating what's been done around them and if they've done enough.
Yeah, that is fair. And they're a team that even has a little bit of money they could still spend. Don Waddell's always kind of been in the boat of he's not huge into rentals, but we'll see if the pressure, again, under 3 hours until the deadline, forces the Canes to do something. They did make that last-minute move last year. Went and got Max Domi for like peanuts. Got him twice retained as well, and he scored some big goals for them in the playoffs. Out west, Pete, I'm looking at a team like Winnipeg. I'm like, man, that team has been struggling to score. Yeah, they went and got Nino Niederreiter, but like, first place in that division is up for grabs. I'm surprised the Jets haven't been a bit more active.
I'm surprised a lot of teams in the Western Conference haven't been a bit more active, just given how wide open it is. And right now, it seems like the Avs and everybody else, especially with Dallas kind of falling off a little bit in the recent months. And so the West is largely up for grabs in my mind. So I have been surprised that basically every big player has been moved from the West to the East. And I'm waiting for the Western Conference to one team in the Western Conference to kind of take advantage of that opportunity and make their move.
Yeah, it'll be a really interesting day to watch if any teams in the West get the itch. We're going to be checking in with Pete every 30 minutes, so look forward to that throughout the day as well. When news breaks, we will have instant reaction from our guy, Nick Alberga, and he's actually the one person on this panel who I'll go ahead and say I have a major beef with, because a couple of weeks ago, he started this whole movement of someone make a trade, someone make a trade. He launched a t-shirt that is someone make a trade. Nick, my beef with you is that you got your wish and everyone made trades way too quickly. Explain yourself.
Second wish was a live cam, like it was OnlyFans with Frank Seravalli, and we're getting it today. So this is like 2 wishes come true on this season, Tyler. But yeah, it's been nuts, man. Like, this is crazy and chaotic, and now we're all pumped up over a Curtis Lazar trade, right?
Yeah, Curtis Lazar for a 4th-round pick, the big splash so far. So far in deadline period, I believe the count now, as I'm trying to update it live, is 48 deals involving 95 players and 62 draft picks. We'll probably clear the 50 mark here at some point this hour. I'll ask you, in Frank's sort of top 5 there, which name intrigues you the most?
On the list right now, I would say Kevin Hayes. I think obviously it's going to be a tough deal to consummate if you're Philadelphia. I wondered on social media earlier today on Twitter at the Golden Muzzy, like, what's going on with Philadelphia? Are you like, you're the worst, one of the worst teams in the league, and you're not really doing much? I'm trying to make sense of this Brendan Lemieux trade too. Like, I know one guy's an RFA, McEwen, going off to Los Angeles. They bring in Brendan Lemieux, who's like your prototypical Philadelphia Flyer, but I have no clue the direction of that team. Everything you hear about Kevin Hayes, he's unbelievable. Loved in the room, loved by his teammates, and they want to trade this guy. It makes no sense, and I thought he knew John Tortorella from back in his day, right? So it's just really, really bizarre. That would be the one guy I would keep an eye on here over the next couple hours. I think he'd be a great addition for anybody out there.
When Frank breaks a deal, Nick will be around to give us his instant reaction, and Matt Larkin, our senior editor of dailyfaceoff.com, is going to be around grading some trades today. And the one that caught my eye from earlier today, because again, like, nothing that crazy has happened yet here on Friday, March 3rd, but Jacob Vrana going from the Detroit Red Wings, Matt, to the St. Louis Blues. What do you make of this move? Slap a grade on this thing from each side.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it was sort of an under-the-radar move this morning, but I think it's still fairly high upside move for the St. Louis Blues. I like what they're doing here. You have the Red Wings retaining salary, of course, half the salary on Jakub Vrana. And Vrana, as long as he's been in the NHL, when he's right mentally, he's an extremely efficient goal scorer. Whenever he's in the lineup, even as a Detroit Red Wing, he has 42 career games played, 20 goals, 39 goal pace in a Red Wings uniform. So obviously he's battled some demons, and you never know what's going to happen in terms of his future, if he's going to be able to keep his head on straight, but it's a low-risk gamble for the Blues. They get an A. They get a player who, if he plays a full season, is a 30-goal scorer at minimum next season. The Detroit Red Wings, they get a C. It's a C for, come on, what could they do here? They're backed into a corner. It just wasn't working out, that relationship with him and the Red Wings anymore. There was not much that Steve Yzerman could do. You're not getting much back, but you're getting free of half that cap hit. So the best you can do, it's a bad situation. They get a C.
Yeah, I was looking courtesy of our friends at Cap Friendly on what the buyout calculator was, which is, I love that tool on their site. And it would have been obviously an extra year, one more and then one after that, of dead cap space if they would have bought out Jacob Vrana at the end of this season like we all expected. So I do give Yzerman a bit of credit. Yeah, he retains the 2 point whatever million to make this deal work, but at least you don't have that lingering extra year of dead money. So the experiment didn't work. That was one of the big splashes of the last deadline, was that big Vrana for Mantha swap with picks involved. And hey, sometimes like that, deals like that just don't work out. I give a GM credit, Matt, who knows when to say, you know what, I'm just going to cut bait here. I'm not going to let this thing linger any longer.
That's right. And also, I give a lot of credit to Doug Armstrong. This is a GM who understands how to retool a lot quicker than I think some GMs do when they're in denial with their team. You look at the way he quickly rebuilt things. 2018, he trades Paul Stastny. That summer, they reload. They get Ryan O'Reilly. They win the Cup the next season. This year, Doug Armstrong, of course, he's loading up. He's got 3 first-round picks now for the draft, having traded O'Reilly, Tarasenko, Barbashev, and now so looking to next year, adding more upside to your lineup already with Vrana, because the ceiling undoubtedly is high there. So suddenly it's like, okay, the Blues, they still have enough young talent to build around. Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, they could reload quickly because of the fact their GM is able to recognize they didn't have the horses quickly enough. So big marks there for Doug Armstrong.
There you go, Matt. Excited to check in with you throughout the day and get your trade grades on hopefully some big moves that we'll see over the next 2 hours and 47 minutes. That brings us to the big duo, the stars of the show. Maybe I shouldn't say that. I don't know. But Mike McKenna and Jay Rosehill, they make up the players' room, and they'll be sitting along with me for a lot of the final 2 hours and 47 minutes of this trade deadline. 2 former NHLers hopping in with us. And Jay, I asked Mike this question last year, so I'll throw it your way. Trade deadline as a member of the media, I would imagine a little bit less stressful than as a player?
No, way more stressful. You guys are throwing numbers and stats and contracts and GMs around like crazy, and I'm expected to keep up with all of it as if I'm Frank Seravalli here. No. It's easier as a player. You just say, tell me where to go, tell me what team I'm on, what am I supposed to do, and you know, the logistics of figuring out when you do get traded is always a bit stressful, but right now there's a lot of numbers getting thrown around, and I've been hitting the head a few times, so I'm not so sure I'm going to be keeping all these straight for the next 3 hours.
Well,
Mike?
Don't sell yourself short here, Rosie, man. Like this is for us is just about kind of reading and reacting and seeing what we think of these trades right off the bat. And even like this morning, we've got a trade between the Philadelphia Flyers and the LA Kings where you've got grit for grit. Right? You got Lemieux going for McEwen, and I'm looking at this going, is this one really what we're going to make sense out of? And so you're trying to dig deep and make sense of what's going on. And a lot of times, Rosie, what you and I know, in the room with players, we don't know what conversations have been like between a general manager and a player or an agent. Maybe somebody's unhappy. Maybe, somebody's looking for a change of scenery that we haven't heard about. These are the things that tend to come out afterwards that we don't know when we're trying to analyze things in the moment, that just adds that layer of complexity to it, Tyler. So we'll do our best today to be able to take these for what they are, but I would always advise people to know that there's stuff below the surface that sometimes we don't know about until, like I say, after the fact.
Yeah, last year, I mean, there were a couple stunners. I remember a deal like Rickard Rakell to the Penguins kind of coming out of nowhere, and we talked about that Vrana Mantha swap as well. The Lemieux for McEwen deal is interesting because it frees up, I think, a little bit of cap space. I'm just looking on Cap Friendly right now. It gives the Kings maybe a little bit of extra wiggle room, going from 1.35 on Lemieux down to a 9.25 in Zach McEwen. McEwen a pending RFA as well. So I don't know, maybe the LA Kings have a little bit more up their sleeve in this one. But luckily, Rosie, you talked about the numbers and all that. We can rely on Cap Friendly for that, and I'm not going to make you bust out the calculator at any point today.
No, yeah, that's good. And I mean, the funny thing is, being on the media side of things, it's you get a different perspective on it, and the way people break it down, like you say, you're trading some, power forward for power forward. What's the reasoning behind that? What's the rationale? And we try to break it down from this perspective. But I always like to go into the locker room and remember when trades were made and who's getting moved around and who's been unhappy for a long time, but the media hasn't got wind of it, and who's butting heads with the GM or the coach, and what's going on behind the scenes. And it's always from a player's perspective, you're looking at, it's so personal. You're not looking at the guy's numbers. You're not looking at his contract or his cap hit. You're saying, who fits in this locker room, who's not happy, who's causing friction, who might be a cancer, who could we add to this? Do we have leadership? And it's all that personal stuff that's kind of more, more personality driven than numbers driven. And that's the stuff that I really remember about the trade deadline and how you mix up a locker room and why trades are made. And it's kind of hard to see from this side of the ropes and this perspective in the media. But when you get down to the nitty gritty and you're actually part of it, it just looks so much different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it used to be felt, Rosie, what you pointed out there feels like that was kind of a time ago for us where the chemistries and the personalities really mattered a lot when GMs were crafting their team and lineup leading up to playoffs. And now I think with the salary cap and every dollar counting, I think it's very numbers driven. There has been a bit of a shift in that, but you'll still see, in my eyes, the best GMs out there are still trying to find that perfect fit. Not just on the ice, off the ice, but within the lineup itself. And you look to like what Tampa Bay's done the last couple of years. They scope out a Brandon Hagel or a Coleman or a Gaudreau that fit that specific need for what they wanted to have in their lineup on down the road. Teams do their homework, but if it doesn't make sense involving dollars any longer, man, they won't pull the deal anymore. But you see this, even we're talking about Lemieux and McEwen, and if that's a savings of $400,000 against the cap, right? If that's really what it comes down to, that's the world we're living in an $82.5 million salary cap world. That's crazy to think about how much
you're talking $400,000. We've had cap hits come up to the last dollar, man. Like these cap crunchers that teams have nowadays. I mean, there was a time when those guys came onto the brass and everyone's like, who is this guy? And how does he think he's going to make a difference?
Who's this nerd?
Team? These guys are crunching numbers down to the bloody dollar. And when you're talking tens of millions of dollars and they can get it down to the dollar, I mean, it is a numbers driven thing, but you also got to remember that, some of these teams are like, only taking on 25% of a pretty blue chip player in the trade deadline. And when you can manipulate salary and have different teams have a 3-team trade and multiple teams are retaining salary and teams like Phoenix are just boat loaded on the players will pay for it out of their escrow. Just bring on some more. We're at the basement. And, you can actually make some more deals. And it kind of feels more like the Wild West of the 90s where, you're not as worried about the numbers as long as your cap cruncher guy is saying, yeah, we can afford this, we can bring this, and they'll bring it in within the dollar, which is absolutely insane to me.
Yeah, the Daily Faceoff YouTube chat is absolutely buzzing right now, and I got some questions that I want to throw your way and a couple questions for you two here, but I'm getting the little signal from our Athletic Brewing insider cam that Frank Seravalli has a bit of an update, so let's bring in Frank. What are you hearing?
Yeah, so just wanted to run through quickly, Tyler, where things stand in terms of some teams that may be in and out. We were just talking about wild cards and what's going on there in terms of players that have term that may be traded. But which teams are still heavily in the mix today in terms of the actual deadline itself? So I'll run through them pretty quickly. The Tampa Bay Lightning, they still have about $1.3 million in cap space. They unloaded Vladislav Namestnikov to San Jose, of course. Got Mikey Esimont back, and they have a bit of an opening. That Tampa, you guys were just talking about the idea of Tampa using every dollar of their cap space. They're going to try if they can. Don't have much by way of assets or prospects, but keep an eye on Tampa. The Los Angeles Kings, you heard that trade Lemieux for McEwen, but the Kings also have a pretty significant chunk of cap space that they have not yet used. Same thing for the Colorado Avalanche, as they have Gabriel Landeskog on long-term injured reserve for the remainder of the regular season. They've spent the bulk of that money. They still have some left. Is there an upgrade potentially to make on the wing or somewhere else for that team? The Winnipeg Jets, everyone wants to know what's the big splash that Kevin Cheveldayoff is going to pull off for this team. Nino Niederreiter, can that be it alone? I believe the Jets are not just looking at some wingers today, but also potentially on the defense market as well to get a little bit of bite and toughness on the back end. The Seattle Kraken, we've talked about. The old Seinfeld Vandelay Industries importer-exporter. Could they be buying and selling, walking that tightrope as a team that is pretty close to locking down a playoff spot this year, but may not be considered one of the true contenders? You look at the prices paid to this point. Carson Soucy, Will Borgen are among the names that they're entertaining on the back end, taking offers on, as well as Morgan Geekie up front. And the Boston Bruins, we've talked about their injuries, all that they've added to this point, Tyler Bertuzzi, Garnet Hathaway, Dmitry Bobby Orlov, and they are also now hit with the injury bug. I'm told Nick Foligno is expected to miss the remainder of the regular season. And Taylor Hall is dealing with what some believe might be a significant knee injury. I believe he went to go see a doctor for a second opinion yesterday. They're still evaluating the results of that. But Taylor Hall could be somewhere between the 4 to 6 week range on his injury, which could, coupled with Foligno, give the Bruins even more cap space, even though they've spent a bunch of their assets. And quickly, I'll just run through, as I check my Twitter feed here, some of the teams that may be out to this point. The New York Rangers, they've done their shopping with Tarasenko and Patrick Kane. The Edmonton Oilers, literally $0 left in cap space. They spent it to the penny with both Nick Bjugstad and Matthias Ekholm coming in. The Dallas Stars, I'm told, are not very active today and are not expected to add beyond the Max Domi trade. The Carolina Hurricanes, everyone's been wondering what's up with them. Shane Gostisbehere, they also made the move up front as well with Jesse Puljujärvi. But I don't think the Canes are very active at the moment. They certainly don't want to be spending future assets and first-round picks on most of the players that have been left on the market. I think they were one of the teams that was in the mix for Kevin Hayes, but don't have the cap space at this point. And it seems like that's a move that might wait until the summer. And the Minnesota Wild, they have also not been very active as well after landing their two forwards in Gustav Nyquist and also Marcus Johansson, as I was blanking on his name. So that's a quick rundown of teams in and out of the mix as we creep closer to 3 p.m. Eastern. And I'll go back to everyone creeping on me.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Seravalli. The chat is active. Over 1,600 of you watching on YouTube alone. So if you're new to the channel, do me a solid. Hit that subscribe button. I have confirmation that we'll get someone to shotgun a beer if we hit 5,000 subs on the channel by the end of the show. It might be a lottery to see who does it, but the odds-on favorite likely being Pete Blackburn there. Let's get back to our player panel with Mike McKenna and Jay Rosehill. Guys, I got a question I'm going to float your way. I also would like some activity in the chat on this one, but the question is, what is your biggest favorite jaw on the floor moment from a trade deadline? And I'll leave this open for you two, whether it's something that happened, a big trade a couple years ago, whatever, something that happened while you were in the league with a team you were on. When you think jaw on the floor moment, trade deadline, Mr. McKenna, what pops into your head?
I can take
I
over.
got two of them here. So two things here. When I was growing up in St. Louis, the biggest jaw on the floor moment I ever could think of is when Wayne Gretzky got traded to the St. Louis Blues from the Los Angeles Kings. That was astonishing. I mean, there'd been rumblings maybe it could happen. No one really thought it could, but you knew Brett Hull and Gretzky were tight, and it would kind of make a lot of sense. Well, you got a half-season cameo with Gretzky before he eventually took off to the New York Rangers, and that was a major bummer, I think, for a lot of people in St. Louis. And I know Gretzky was someone who really liked it here. I believe his wife, I think Janet, is from here, and he's even owns a house here to this day. So that was kind of a disappointment, but it was an unbelievable trade that it took place. The one that I can think of from my own playing days, I remember being in the American League in Portland, Maine, and we had a guy traded mid-game, Chris Summers, playing D, and I'm in the net, and I see they're pulling this guy off the bench, and he just does this like skate of shame off the ice from the bench to the other side. And I'm like, I'm looking for a trainer to be walking with him and see him hobbling, and he's fine, right? And he got traded. So we come in between periods. I think it was in the second, maybe it was in the first period even, because I think I was in the home end. And you come in between, it's like, what happened to Chris? Well, he got traded. Okay, so we never saw him again. You know, it was like, that was it. He's gone. Like, so that was just a complete shocker for me as a player. But as a fan, Gretzky coming to St. Louis, just never thought that could have happened. And man, it was pretty wild here as a kid in this city to see it happen.
Rosie, what comes to your mind when you think jaw on the floor deadline moments?
Yeah, that's a pretty cool one. The Gretzky one is obviously huge. I mean, growing up as a Calgary Flames fan, you see Doug Gilmour go to the Leafs, and it's like, did we get enough for him? Martin St. Louis, was a player in our organization. We gave him away for literally nothing, and then literally look at his Hall of Fame career after that. Winning Stanley Cups and being just a huge piece of so many teams and good teams at that too. And Theoren Fleury at the time was kind of this little guy that could bang and crash and get it done. And I think he was overshadowing St. Louis, and maybe he was a bit of a late bloomer for sure. So that's kind of my Flames memories at the time. But, this year, the Jacob Chychrun trade, I mean, everyone is just all over this guy. There's multiple teams that are looking for him, wanting him. Are they going to unload him? They start scratching him. So you think, oh, something's imminent. Usually when they scratch him, it's like they scratch him for that night and he gets moved the next day. He's getting scratched for like 3 weeks. All of a sudden, player, like, you know what it's like, Mike, when you have a day off, say you play on a Saturday, you get the Sunday off, and what your legs feel like on Monday, when you're used to going hard every single day and playing and having your body go through that every day. Taking a day or two off, like the All-Star break, is just killer. The first skate after that, you're toast. This guy's on the sideline, like skating with his trainer on an open ice. You can't replicate anything game worthy at that point. And 3 weeks he sits there and everyone's going, what is going on? And the Phoenix Coyotes just, in my opinion, kind of butchered this deal, and then all of a sudden just give him away for a few draft picks, and everyone's just like, that was what this was all about. So my jaw was on the floor this week when that went down, and thinking to myself, how many people could have poached that guy? How many people offered that? And they said, no, whatever they were holding out for, I have no idea. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, well, this guy hasn't skated in a month, I don't want him. And then they just unload him for peanuts?
We'll get back to this conversation in just a second, but we do have a trade to get to, Frank.
That's right. Vladislav Namestnikov, we were just talking about him, flipped from the Tampa Bay Lightning to the San Jose Sharks. Well, now he is on the move once again, going to the Winnipeg Jets, I'm told, in exchange for a 2025 fourth-round pick. That is the return going to San Jose. And Namestnikov, add another skilled forward to the Jets group, helps certainly their depth as they continue to push toward the Stanley Cup playoffs. And Namestnikov, interestingly enough, brings back the exact same return that he did when he was traded on deadline day last year from the Detroit Red Wings down to the Dallas Stars. So in a span of a couple days, Namestnikov from Tampa to San Jose on to the Winnipeg Jets, as that was always the plan for the Sharks once they got him, which was to flip him. Vladislav Namestnikov, I think, woke up this morning, number 12 on our trade targets board, something like that. So take him off the list.
Scratch another name off the list. Frank, quickly before I let you go, on the Jets, do you think Kevin Cheveldayoff will do anything bigger than this, or maybe just a couple more small tinkering-like moves?
Yeah, I think they're continuing to monitor the market. And I think one of the things I mentioned previously that they continue to look at, if they can get it, is some help on defense to beef up this blue line, add a little bit of bite. That's the one thing when I watch this team, they've got some skill, certainly led by Josh Morrissey, but they have a bunch of other guys that outside of Brendan Dillon aren't necessarily very big, don't bring a lot of muscle and brawn. And so I wonder if that's one of those areas that the Jets might be looking in. They still have cap space to burn. They came in as one of the teams that's heading towards the playoffs with the most cap space. How aggressive will they get with their future assets, or do they like their team mostly as it is currently assembled? One other name that is on our trade targets board from the Winnipeg Jets, Logan Stanley, 6'6" defenseman who's been a healthy scratch for the bulk of the season. There's been a number of teams that have been interested, sort of poking around saying, hey, if you're not going to play this guy, we'll take him off your hands. 6'6". Why can't he be the next version of Jamie Alexiak, for instance, who took 8 years from his draft in order to get to a full-time NHL player making an impact in the game? Sometimes those bigger guys take a little bit longer to develop. And Stanley, I think at this point, he hasn't requested a trade by any stretch of the imagination, but is in a spot where he hasn't played 13 games this season, wants an opportunity, thinks that he can do more. And I'll be curious to see if the Jets facilitate that or not. I guess it will depend on any defenseman that they might target this afternoon.
All right. Thank you very much, Frank. The Insider Cam brought to you by our friends at Athletic Brewing. Let's bring in Nick Alberga, get a little bit of a reaction to this. A Canadian team making a move with Namestnikov again going from San Jose to Winnipeg. It's a 2025 fourth round pick, I believe, going the other way. Nick, if this, let's walk down the hypothetical of this being it for the Winnipeg Jets, a team that is within striking distance of the top spot in their division. They have a piece like Connor Hellebuck between the pipes, and we know what an elite goalie can do come playoff time. If it's only Niederreiter and Namestnikov, is that maybe a bit of a failure on the part of Cheveldayoff, or do you think he can run with just this group?
I don't know if it's called a failure because, as we know, the MO of Kevin Cheveldayoff over the years, he never really typically goes all in. Like, he likes to always have one eye on the future, one eye on the present. I do like the pickup. It adds versatility. I wonder if, Namestnikov is trying to compete with Mike Sillinger for the most teams ever and trades. I mean, it's pretty crazy. He's been dealt twice now in the last 3 days. For that price, why not go after James Van Riemsdyk? So it tells me the price too rich for Winnipeg to pay on that front. I do like the composition of this team. I just wonder from the perspective of eventually having to play Colorado or like an Edmonton or, other teams in that conference that are upper end, have a legitimate shot to win the Stanley Cup. How does Winnipeg, compete with those teams? I like their roster. Obviously, everything's spearheaded by the goaltending situation. Josh Morrissey's having an outstanding season, but you can never have enough depth come the Stanley Cup playoffs. I'm not sure Namestnikov is going to be that guy for me.
Yeah, that's fair. From a San Jose perspective, when they made the swap of Namestnikov for Isamont, I was kind of like, why are you just randomly taking on money from the Tampa Bay Lightning and helping them out? But when you look at this big picture, Isamont was a guy they scooped up on waivers earlier this year. You're basically now able to turn that asset into a fourth round pick. So not the worst work in the world from Sharks GM Mike Greer. Thanks for popping in, Nick Alberga. Just after 12:30 Eastern time, 2 hours and 27 minutes away from the NHL trade deadline. And we'll be staying live for an hour post deadline. So as all those little deals start to roll in, we'll be staying with you here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. One team that has been, active, it feels like an understatement. They have been all over the place, absolutely loading up. And that is the Boston Bruins. Our friend Pete Blackburn is out in Boston. Pete, this Bruins load up. I see your tweets every time it happens with the Donnie Big Balls thing, but they really have pushed all their chips into the middle, as you can see here on the screen.
Yeah, 100%. And in the best way too, because they're going out and getting players that help them right now, fit immediate needs. And what they're sending the other way is draft picks. And as much as I love what Don Sweeney's doing right now, he's getting good players, and he's also recognizing his own weakness, which is drafting. So he's just giving away all his draft picks. So I think it's a win-win for the Bruins, maximizing their chances this year, and then limiting the opportunity for pain in the future when Don Sweeney strikes out on those draft picks.
Enough. And the one move that we don't see on this board is the extension given to David Pastrnak, one of the richest deals in the NHL's salary cap era. What did you make of getting Pastrnak locked up? And not that there was ever really major doubt it wouldn't happen, but doing that and almost eliminating the distraction, I think, and having that storyline lingering is a big win.
100%. All-time good vibes yesterday, getting Bertuzzi and then immediately, extending Pastrnak. And I think that would have been somewhat of a cloud hanging over this team. You're right, though, that there was never a state of outright panic given what this front office has been able to do in terms of player retention and understanding which players are important to this team. So, I think that the Pastrnak deal is very palatable, both from getting it done now, but also the number itself and the 8 years. I don't think that anybody's outraged over that number, especially with the expected rise in the cap. So all-time good vibes right now for sure.
Does the deal look worse, $11.25 million cap hit, with you now knowing the fact he says his favorite ice cream flavor is apple? That's not even a flavor of ice cream. That's not a thing.
Maybe it's a cultural difference. I don't know. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they have something over in Europe that is like the apple ice cream that we're not privy to. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he can provide some to me. I'm willing to try apple ice cream, but that was a bit of a shock and a bit of a, well, what the hell is going on here? Why does this guy like apple ice cream? So like apple crisp with ice cream, I'm in on that, but I've never actually
It
heard of
makes
apple
sense.
ice cream.
Yeah, maybe it's a cultural thing because just reading that sounds terrible. Then you think about it a little bit and you're like, okay, like I guess that could be a thing. I don't know. Anyways, ice cream talk here on deadline day. Pete Blackburn from Bally Sports stopping in to give us his take on what's going on. He'll be back in about another half an hour. Let's circle back to our player room with Mike McKenna and Jay Rosehill. A small move by the Winnipeg Jets, but we will take those small victories today. No doubt. Dangerous Wade is in the YouTube chat, says apple is a flavor of ice cream and it's delicious. I like ice cream on an apple dessert makes sense to me, and I'm probably making too big of a deal of it, but it just sounds unsettling to hear the words apple flavored ice cream. I don't know, guys.
Let me add this one as the resident food guy around this joint here. You ever had apple cinnamon with little chunks of apple in the ice cream? I've had that before as a kid, and it was delicious.
Okay.
So I'm going to take this at face value. I believe there may have been a little bit of maybe a little uncertainty as to what this actually is. If you don't have the cinnamon factor, whatever. Apple cinnamon mixed in with vanilla ice cream, really good stuff. But this trade, so I mean, Namestnikov last year when Dallas picked him up, I thought it was an undercover move that was pretty slick. I thought it'd be a good play for them. Now, it hasn't been a great year for him in Tampa. He's kind of meandered around between lines, third line. You do look at Winnipeg past their first two lines, and I start to wonder what that depth would be like. Can Namestnikov fit in there? Sure. Is he pretty cost effective? Yes. But it's another bit piece. I'm not sure really how much he'll bring other than a little bit of scoring, right? And that's kind of it if you get that. So for the price they paid, if you're Winnipeg trying to round out your forward crew, it makes sense. But it's not a deal that's going to put that team in Winnipeg over the top. I think they need more than that to just be able to even get past the first or second round of playoffs the way that team has played lately, Rosie.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I mean, with the West, they're kind of, they're hanging out there in like a wild card spot, but they're within striking distance of even winning their division. I mean, there's a few games left. You can get hot, handful of points. You go on a 4-game streak, and teams ahead of you drop a couple. I think Winnipeg is in the mix. And the biggest reason I think that they're going to add pieces and see what they can do. Are they a contender right now? No. But when you have Connor Hellebuck back there, if he decides just to be that brick wall and just stop everything and turn his game upside down, that team can get a lot of confidence, whether it's coming into the playoffs or in that first round of playoffs. I love it when teams just catch fire in that first round and all of a sudden all eyes are on them saying, wow, especially when they're in a weaker conference like the Western right now, where it's kind of up for grabs. Everyone's talking about the East, but I mean, who's going to tap dance their way through the Western Conference and get themselves to the Stanley Cup final? It's kind of up for grabs. And when you have a goaltender like Connor Hellebuck, I mean, kind of anything's possible. And I think they're just positioning themselves to give them the best chance going into the playoffs.
Yeah, and that team in Winnipeg for me is it's kind of has that same Rick Bowness feel that he had with the Dallas Stars a couple of years ago when they went to the Stanley Cup Finals. They've had great stretches where, with Rick, it's just work, work, work. Teams are motivated to play for him, but at a certain point, they can be a little bit loose. And I think you've seen that recently, and Hellebuck really carried that team. Like, he's been a top 3, top 4 goalie in the league all season long. He has to be at his best for Winnipeg to have a chance. And that's a lot to ask for a goalie, especially for somebody like Hellebuck, that they run as hot as they do. The guy plays almost every game. He wants to play every game, but there's not much there behind him. So I think that Winnipeg, I liked Frank's take earlier. If they get a little bit of snarl and maybe a little bit of help on the back end that can move the puck to the forwards a little quicker, maybe that helps too. But I think they're just going to straight up have to tighten up defensively more than anything else with Winnipeg to get these wins to be able to carry into the playoffs.
Yeah, fair. Let's talk about how this maybe affects the guy who is number 1 on our trade targets board, James Van Riemsdyk. The Jets were one of those teams that, maybe was rumored to be poking around on JVR. We've heard the ask probably isn't that significant in terms of just draft picks going the other way. When you look at JVR, though, I'll start with you, Rosie. What team around the league do you look at and go, they'd probably benefit from scooping this guy up?
Oh, there's a plethora of team that could take a guy like him. He's a veteran guy who's got a lot under his belt, and he's number one on the trade bait list for a reason. And if anyone wants to, bolster their lineup, it's always interesting to see who's actually making a run, who's pulling back, who's looking for draft picks, who's selling, who's buying. And with JVR being number one, and I don't know, what is it, like a second, third rounder people are asking for? I mean, that's peanuts. When you go back throughout the years and look at the trades that are made, and you see like these third, fourth rounders and blah, blah, and then it's fun to look back and say, oh, well, who did that become? Because right now it's just a number on a board that means absolutely nothing to almost anybody on the roster or in the fan base. It's just a pick, but it's nice to go back and see, well, who did that guy become? And quite often adding a James Van Riemsdyk, whether he has tenure or not, or what his contract status is, if you're doing something right now for the next 20 games in our playoff push, to add a guy with his pedigree for a rounder, whatever, round third rounder, and it's going to become X, it's usually kind of inconsequential unless you get, some great scouting and get a guy that turns out to be quite a player in the third round. It's always interesting to see who guys take a shot at. And if the price is not that steep with some picks, I think anyone could take a stab at him.
Yeah, I got 3 teams here for JVR, and that's, a former teammate of mine. Rosie, did you play with JVR? I can't remember if you guys crossed paths.
No, I didn't quite cross paths with him. I was kind of like dodging him throughout Toronto and Philadelphia, but nothing but good things to say. Everyone likes the guy, and that's the reason I talk highly about him, is because of his pedigree and his history with his personality and the way he fits into locker rooms.
So you nailed it, Rosie. That's exactly the direction I was going. This guy's a beloved teammate. He works like crazy. He's willing to do things that some people just straight up aren't, man. He'll go to the front of the net. He plays hard.
Yeah.
I've got 3 teams that for me really work for him. The Jets, Tyler, I remember earlier this year on Daily Faceoff Live on one of the shows we did, I gave the Winnipeg Jets James Van Riemsdyk, and here we are now. Like, I think that he would be a really good fit for that club. He fits that ethos of the Jets, especially under Rick Bowness. I do worry about the Jets, though, trying to keep pace. That's my only caveat there. JVR doesn't have the best wheels. I think he'd be a pretty good fit in Vegas. The problem with Vegas is now JVR's got a $7 million cap hit. Would they be able to find any way to fit him underneath? They'd have to move somebody out, I would think, to do that. I would be surprised, but they could do it. There are movable assets with the Vegas Golden Knights. But the one team that's the ultimate wild card for me here, boys, I just keep wondering about this team lying in the weeds here that's right on the edge. It's the Buffalo Sabres. Okay, with Alex Tuck now being out of the lineup, it's it doesn't seem to be long-term, but you're maybe looking for a little juice. And with all the cap space that Kevin Adams has, the GM of the Buffalo Sabres, wouldn't it be a big vote of confidence to go out and get somebody that's a difference maker, even as a rental? If there's a little salary retained, if you don't have to give up too much, I would like to see that. I think he'd be fun in that lineup in the first place. And I think that it wouldn't hurt that Buffalo team to have, somebody who's at least been around for quite a long time in the league to show those young guys, hey, we're going to make this playoffs and you're going to be a big part of it. Imagine him standing in front of the net with Tage Thompson shooting.
But dude, a difference maker
for a goalie.
A difference maker for what though, Mike? I mean, the Buffalo Sabres, look how deep that division in that conference are. I mean, we're questioning whether the Maple Leafs his timing is wrong on when they put all their chips on the table. It's an absolutely assassin-filled conference of the East right now, and you're talking about the Buffalo. Say they do sell something off, and say they do get on a rental for what? For what? To get through the Boston Bruins, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Carolina Hurricanes, the New York Rangers, the New Jersey Devils. Like, good luck.
Yeah, but that's my thing, is that if they go have an incredible first round, even if they lose in game 7 of the first round, that experience is valuable for a young team. I remember, man, I didn't cross the bridge in playoffs myself, like as a playoff professional hockey player, until like my 10th or 12th year pro or something like that. I think it was my 11th year pro. And I finally won a series. Or no, I didn't. The team I was on lost a 5-game series to the Hershey Bears in the first round of the American Hockey League, but I played great. And it was the first time I was like, man, I know I can do this. Like, this was a great year and it set me up down the road. I think that has value. Right. And that's with, looking at what Buffalo has with all that cap space, with, the amount of draft picks that they do have. I just think, man, if I'm Kevin Adams, boy, it'd be nice to be able to go give your boys a little boost here, because who knows, they could be dangerous. I know it. You're 100% right, Rosie. That division's scary as hell. But I really believe Buffalo can surprise and at least be competitive. You don't want to go in and get wiped out in 4 games. That would be what I'd be scared of.
No, and at the end of the day, if you're taking on a $7 million rental and you're giving away a draft pick that, like I said, could or maybe probably won't become too much, and you're giving your whole core a huge experience that many guys it's surprising how many guys go through their career and have no playoff experience. That is definitely valuable. And if you're thinking long-term in that sense, and maybe it works, but if it doesn't, we gain this, which is not exactly a tangible thing you can put on paper, but is extremely valuable to your core group of guys and your young guys especially, then I guess you can't understand it. It's tough to go into that war room and see where the guy's head's at. But if you take a stab at a guy like him and that's the worst case scenario, then I think you could justify it.
Yeah, that's why I've got it deep on my list, right? It's a total left field type of idea. But on a personal level, I'd love to see it. And I just think of that team, like they believe in themselves in Buffalo. They really do, man. There's a good culture there. They like Don Granato as a coach. I just think it'd be cool to see. I'd love to see him compete, man. I just sneak them in the door and watch them get past the first round if they get a chance. That'd be awesome.
I'd like it
Even
too.
think about that from the perspective of a guy like Dylan Cousins, right? The season he's been having on that second line for the Sabres, and he's largely been playing with like JJ Peterka and Jack Quinn, who are fine, but they're young, they're inexperienced. I wonder, even just getting JVR, and I'm looking right now at Cap Friendly, they have 3 second-round picks this year, and they still have the LA Kings third-rounder this year as well. Let's say the cost only is a third-round pick for JVR. Go make that move. Give Dylan Cousins someone to play with. Maybe even just having that little bit of runway could give you, if you're Kevin Adams, some insight into what you want to do this summer, right? Like, okay, look at how Cousins played with this big power forward winger. Let's go get one of those guys in free agency now.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's not even necessarily, this guy is going to change our franchise or make an impact. It's that adding this guy is going to help our core, and that's why rentals become, an issue. If you look at teams, I don't have anyone in mind, but just look at the teams where a guy's maybe young and he's an up and coming star, and you're trying to like make him develop a little bit more and get that experience and get that confidence. And you see him at the end of a season and you can see it on guys' face. They're kind of unconfident or whatever. And then they go through a little bit of a playoff run and they make a push and they make some noise. Then watch them in the preseason the next year. All of a sudden their brow's a little bit furrowed. They're pointing around and quarterbacking some things, and it's like that guy has gained some valuable confidence, some valuable experience just by getting to the first round of the playoffs, as opposed to season's over, everyone's talking about everywhere else, pack my shit, get home and do my summer deal. You give that guy an NHL playoff experience, and I've only been in it once, and it is a totally different beast, and it is a big deal. And if you're a part of that and you contribute and you're a young guy that you're trying to develop, that just goes miles and miles, especially for a GM looking from above down on their team. When you can give a young guy that you're trying to develop that kind of experience, it's invaluable sometimes.
We had another question here in the chat from Boomer, who says Toronto made too many changes. And we were just talking about, Buffalo and sending a message to the young core that, okay, we're going to help you out, right? Like, you guys have had a great season. You're right on the edge of a playoff push. We want to give you a little bit of a boost there. Jay, I guess I'll start with you on this one, since you cover the Leafs and you do Leafs Morning Take Monday through Friday. Do you buy into that at all?
I don't. There's something to be said for changing up a locker room. I mean, a 1/3 of it got mixed up in the last 2 weeks, and that is a big deal a lot of the time. But personally, I mean, if you bring in, go back to Jonathan Drouin, where he's, people are wondering about his character and how he fits in the locker room. If you bring in a guy like that and he's stepping on people's toes and everyone's wondering what's going on, that could be a problem for sure. But when you bring in like Ryan O'Reilly and Luke Schenn and Gustafsson and Achari and these guys that are character guys, and they're guys that fit in well anywhere, they're well liked everywhere they go, they bring a facet of team camaraderie with them, they're only going to make that group stronger. Is the power play going to run through a few lines, and are they going to run a couple different lines, and they run, 11 forwards, and the lines are different for every shift for a game or two? Because Keefe's famous for that, trying to figure out, who hits with who. And this team's used to playing with different players night in and night out. You got 20-some games here to try to figure that out. I don't think it's a problem. It's not like they're just going to be sitting there going, oh my goodness, the room is so off kilter. No one knows what to do, and we've lost our jam, and we don't know how to play hockey anymore. Let's get serious. These guys are professionals. The people they brought in are veterans, and they're good character quality players, and they fill holes that the Toronto Maple Leafs needed to be filled. People have been screaming for this for a long time. And you look at last night, Luke Schenn, I mean, his first shift, he puts a guy literally on his back. Then he goes and puts Milan Lucic on his back. Lucic gets pissed off, takes a half-rink run at him where Luke's flat-footed. Luke puts him on his back again. I'm like, oh God, is Lucic going to come after Lukey here right now? No, he just goes about his business. He's not interested. We haven't had that in a long time, and we've needed that. And bringing in a guy like Luke Shannon, Ryan O'Reilly, and all their experience is not throwing that locker room off whatsoever.
Yeah, you're bang on. They're adding to the locker room. They're making it better. You've got people that are proven, they know what it takes, and they fit in seamlessly with the core group, right? John Tavares, and I could see John Tavares and Ryan O'Reilly being best buds immediately. You know, like where they've been, what they've accomplished, kind of in that same role. And I don't discount the hometown factor of somebody like an O'Reilly coming back to Toronto. Like, you take a lot of pride when you put on your hometown jersey. That's a factor. The one team that I actually have concerns with, and whether this is valid or not, this is just a gut feeling, guys. I do worry about the New York Rangers with the additions of Tarasenko and Kane, how that plays out. Like, I don't have that same warm and fuzzy feeling about Toronto, because I'll tell you this much, bringing in O'Reilly and Achari, I didn't like that deal by itself. Like, if that's all the Leafs did, I didn't like it, because I didn't think they addressed their D, which was what really scared me, and the goaltending. I think goaltending just is what it is in Toronto. Okay, it's probably not going to be changed. But they've addressed their D now. Bringing in McCabe, Shen. Now that O'Reilly and Achari deal that I gave a C+, suddenly that deal turns into an A for me, because it's a total package with what Dubas has done. I like what he has. Now in New York, Kane and Tarasenko, that's two big dogs that want the puck at all times, and that's not a bad thing. But can Kane, is Kane going to be a guy you trust even defensively for a team like New York that I'm not sold on them defensively? Like, I still think Shesterkin covers up an awful lot for that club. Is Tarasenko going to be battled night in, night out in the same way, right? He hasn't been the power play force he previously was. Like, I don't feel as confident in what New York's going to have chemistry-wise from the move they've made. And it's not because I dislike any player there. It's just a gut feeling. I don't have the same, like I say, same confidence in the team to be able to move seamlessly like the Maple Leafs have, if you ask me.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I didn't want Patrick Kane to go to the Toronto Maple Leafs, not because I don't like Patrick Kane, not because he's not a phenomenal Hall of Fame player. It's just when you look at the core of that team and what they need, you bring in someone like Patrick Kane that can step on a lot of toes, not anything of the fault of his own. But when you look at Ryan O'Reilly, I mean, Conn Smythe winner, grinder guy, glue guy, locker room guy, super experienced, super veteran, super well loved by everybody. I mean, that just checks a lot of boxes within that locker room where I agree, a Tarasenko and a Kane going to they're phenomenal additions on paper. But again, with their styles of play and their personalities and just who they are, it's kind of a question mark. Does this fit or not? I know it fits on paper. I know it looks great, and everyone's high on the New York Rangers right now. But if you go back to the 90s when there was no trade deadline, the New York Rangers and Glenn Sather literally just wrote checks. I mean, they had Chris Gratton for $10 million in 99 because they needed a power forward. He was higher paid than anyone else in the league. And it just doesn't work. You just can't just look at paper and throw names down. It has to kind of fit and go with the vibe of what your locker room needs. And I am high on the Toronto Maple Leafs right now on their additions, personnel-wise, as far as personality and locker room jam, more than I am on the New York Rangers. Not saying they didn't get better, but I just prefer the way the Leafs have done it with character guys.
Yeah. And just a real quick aside, how about Chris Gratton? Unbelievable guy. Finished his career with us at Norfolk Admirals. Tampa Bay sends him down.
He played 18 years in the NHL. He comes down to the American League with us, and we're playing rebound at the end of practice, and he's crying, laughing. He's draped over guys. He looks at me and he goes, "I've never had more fun playing hockey." And we're one of the shittiest teams in the American Hockey League. We're a disaster of an organization, Tampa Bay Lightning, top to bottom, and he could not have a better time. And I was just like, man, he's talking about being 18 years old, being in high school, playing in the NHL. And the girl in his class is like, my dad was talking about you. I didn't even know you played hockey. And he's got all these great stories. Nicest guy in the world. He gets picked up at the deadline by the Florida Panthers. And in every guy's stall, when he leaves, he had to make a special trip to the rink and to the Apple store. He puts an iPad in every guy's stall, and we never see him, never get to thank him. Puts an iPad in every guy's stall, and we're all American League players. And then off he goes to make his little run with Florida to finish his career. Just salt of the earth guys. Those are the guys that you remember. That's for sure.
Yeah. Before we kick it back to you, Tyler, I got one thing to tag on that. It's just the best, man. Chris Gratton had never played a minute in the American Hockey League.
No.
So Zenon Konopka, who was our captain on this team, made him pay for rookie party. So
You're fucking right.
He went through everything. Rookie party, paid like, $1,000 for rookie party. He did all the rookie stuff. Like, it was hysterical, and he loved it. Like just like Rosie said, he was having the time of his life. It probably, it was a nice way. As bad as that situation could have been for him, he made the most of it, and that really says a lot about people. Because Rosie, we've seen guys come down to the American League and just be like, "Whatever, I'm done. I'm not trying."
I want nothing to do with you. Get me out of here as fast as possible. I shouldn't be here. This is a blemish on my hockey DB resume. And some guys go that way, and everyone down there, and there's guys down there that are going to have 10-year NHL careers and stuff. It's not like you're down in Pigeonville. You come down there and everyone's just like, who are you, you selfish guy? And a guy like Chris Gratton, complete opposite, took a situation and made the absolute most of us, and obviously made an impression on two young guys like us.
Yep.
Oh, that is an awesome story. The deadline, yeah, it can do things like that. And Rosie got an iPad out of it. One of the better deadline transactions maybe of your career, hey?
Still got it.
I think they, I think they were iPods, because this was 2009.
Pod.
I don't think they'd even made an iPad yet.
Which was hot at the time, which was very hot ticket at the time.
With the wheel on it. Remember those?
iPods it held like 90 songs. There's 90 songs on that baby.
Let's go back to the top 5 of our trade board, and we're going to check in with both Nick Alberga and Pete Blackburn here in just a couple of minutes. But you look at that top 5, John Klingberg at 2, Kevin Hayes at 3, Brock Besser at 4, Vrana, boom, he's gone off to the Blues from Detroit. When you look at that top 4, gentlemen, I'll start with you, Mike, and we just dug in deep to JVR. Kevin Hayes is the one. Hayes and Besser both have terms. So I guess I'll throw you a question about Klingberg here. Do you think this is a guy, even though he struggled in Anaheim, can he have a bounce back playing on a better team? My question would be, are his struggles all on him, or is this a situation where he's a guy who needs to be surrounded with just maybe more talent?
It's like anything, Tyler. It's definitely a little bit of both. But, even dating back to this summer and last season when Klingberg's talks with the Dallas Stars weren't going anywhere, I just kept thinking, John, you better not overplay your hand here, man. I'm a little nervous about this 29, 30 years old, thinking you're going to cash in a big 7 or 8 year deal. You need to read the room here a little bit. And the deal went on. The negotiations went on forever. He ended up firing his agent. He ended up taking a 1-year deal for $7 million in Anaheim and thinking, well, I'll just bet on myself. It doesn't look like a good bet, because I don't think his next contract is going to be very good compared to what it could have been in the past. And so, if you ask me for Klingberg, I think he definitely needs some help with him. I think he's a very capable power play player. He's one of the best in the league, walking the line, getting shots through. He's still fantastic at that. And if you put him on a team that's got weapons, like a Tampa Bay Lightning, for example, who I believe Frank reported this morning, there's still at least a little bit of chatter that maybe they were interested there. He can fit in. He can fit in a lower pairing if you need to, and maybe even a little bit higher. But he's going to need somebody that's pretty stable to go alongside him as a blue liner. He's not the guy that you look at to be your defensive shutdown guy in any situation. He moves the puck well. He can skate, but he comes with warts, And if you're going to just use him as a power play specialist to try to win a Stanley Cup, I'd feel pretty comfortable with that with some sheltered minutes. But I tell you what, if you're looking long-term to keep him around, man, somebody's going to have to think pretty hard about that one. So Rosie, your next D-man at some point too. What do you think on Klinger here?
Yeah, Klinger, I think you touched on it. I look at that and I look at Kevin Hayes more than anything. I mean, everyone's talking about what can we do right now, and it's an immediate effect, and these rentals to me. And I mean, I've seen guys get dealt to rentals, and it's they leave their team and they're going to some team who's kind of renting them, and just, it's almost like you feel used, like you're just using me for the next few weeks to see what can happen, but I'm probably not going to end up there. I'm not moving my wife there. I'm not moving my family there. But you look at a Kevin Hayes who's got term left, and, a 30-year-old guy with a good background with, leadership capabilities. And if you're looking beyond just this year, you get a guy like him. I know he's got a big cap hit and whatnot, and you can argue whether he's worth it or not, but he's obviously earned that contract and has upside. You bring him on, and then all of a sudden when a guy gets to a locker room who's got that, all of a sudden he's more invested. He puts his stamp, he puts his mark on, he starts making those connections with players and starts organizing things. And, hey, we're doing this tonight, and the guys are coming over to my house, and the girls are coming too, and we're all going to meet. And a guy with his tenure is all of a sudden, investing himself in the organization. And I just don't think you see that with some of these rentals where guys are just coming here, oh shit, I'll be in the hotel for the next few weeks and we'll see what's going on, and I'll probably, sign as a free agent somewhere else. I think there's a little bit of less investment from those type of players personally.
Yeah, and that center market out there. Sorry, I'll tag this real quick. The center market isn't there's not much left if you're looking for a center. Like, so if you need somebody, you may have to go down that route of getting Kevin Hayes. And like his contract when it was first signed at $7+ million, that was a big deal. But I think it's come more in line with what he's capable of producing now. So, 30 years old is a bit of risk to carry him around for 3 seasons. That's a sticking point. Brock Besser's kind of in that same boat, right? There's term left on his contract. I'm bullish on Besser. I think he can still finish. All that worries me about Besser, though, is that his injury history makes me so nervous. I don't know if my risk reward would be worth it with him. I think he can score again. I just don't know if you're going to have him in the lineup for as much as he has left on his contract.
All right, we are at the 1 hour mark, or just past it, of today's show, which means we are within 2 hours of the NHL deadline. As you can see with our countdown at the top of the screen, a minor deal here. The Montreal Canadiens officially announcing that they have acquired defenseman Frederick Allard from the LA Kings in exchange for forward Nate Schnarr. We are at the 1 hour mark, so let's look back at what we have seen so far today. Earlier this morning, Jacob Vrana, the Wings kept 50% of his salary and moved him to the St. Louis Blues. Forward Dylan McLaughlin and a 2025 7th-round pick going back the other way. So Detroit, instead of potentially having to buy out Vrana this offseason, they decided, hey, we'll just keep half the money now, and St. Louis gets a free lottery ticket, a deal that Matt Larkin really liked in his trade grades earlier today. We also had Curtis Lazar going from the Vancouver Canucks to the New Jersey Devils. Curtis Lazar has been to a lot of NHL organizations. It's a 2024 4th-round pick in exchange for Lazar. So the Devils get a little bit of depth, and the Canucks add another pick here. They've been very active over the last little bit and have a couple of players still on the trade bait board. And then it was kind of a little bit of a hockey trade, I suppose. The Philadelphia Flyers acquire Brendan Lemieux in exchange and a 5th-round pick. They send Zach McEwen the other way. This deal frees up just over $400,000 in cap space for the LA Kings, and they get McEwen, who is a pending RFA as well, so a bit of team control in that one to boot. So those are the 3 deals that we've had officially done so far. We've been hearing some rumblings about potentially a Nick Bonino deal to Pittsburgh, but nothing confirmed on that front yet, at least
Tyler,
the cap. Oh, yes, Frank?
No, the Nick Bonino trade was finalized this morning. It's Nick Bonino for a 5th and a 7th, and they're also sending a 5th-round pick to the third-party broker. Just FYI.
All right, well, there you go. So Bonino getting retained twice, and the other deal was Namestnikov for a 4th. So thanks for hopping in with that one, Frank. The Bonino deal is done. Couple of picks. He goes back to Pittsburgh, where he's had some success throughout a couple of playoff runs. It is just after 1 o'clock Eastern time as we continue to creep closer to the NHL trade deadline. Let's check back in with our pal, Pete Blackburn. Pete, I don't know if you're much of a gambler or anything like that, but if you've ever had a bad loss, I'm sure you can look at the situation John Klingberg's in and say, well, at least it wasn't that bad of a loss. A dude who probably could have signed, and Frank's talked about this before on a few shows, for like north of $45 million on a long-term deal, takes the 1-year deal in Anaheim, and man, things did not go well for either party there.
No, I mean, it's one of those things with hindsight, it becomes, a lot tougher, right? But you could see it at the time and say that it makes sense to bet on yourself and a team that honestly seemed like it had some momentum after last year. I know they weren't very good last year, but they had their moments where you could see the direction of the Anaheim Ducks and say, this team's going to be exciting in a few years, and maybe I'll jump in here. Maybe it works out and I get an extension, and for a team that, you know, is projecting to go where I want to go. Obviously now it doesn't work out, and Anaheim looks god awful, like an absolute atrocious team. And now he's looking at an opportunity to go somewhere else for a half season. So hindsight's 2020 there, but you can see why he may have been pushed in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that a couple of years ago with Taylor Hall before he was eventually dealt to the Bruins as well, right? It was like, okay, he's signing this ticket in Buffalo, and like if it works, good, they might have a long-term partnership. Worst case scenario, the Sabres have bought themselves, we all thought, a first-round pick for sure for a guy like Taylor Hall, and now you're looking at a situation from the Ducks' perspective, and that gamble they took as well. It was like, okay, you bring in Klingberg, it's $7 million, but hey, if this thing goes well, you can just move him out, and you might have just bought yourself a first-round pick. Now we're at the point where you probably got to keep some of this money coming down, especially if a team like Tampa is in the mix and you're getting like a mid-round pick at this point. That's a bit of an expensive gaffe by the Ducks as well.
Yeah, it's sort of a situation to, I don't know if it's comparable to the Chychrun situation where you kind of overplay your hand and you wait out the market too much and the price goes down. And so like, yeah, it's obviously not the best case scenario for either side here. And I don't think it's working out the way that they would have intended.
Do you think we'll see a big splash at it all for a guy like Colton Parayko? I mean, JT Miller has plummeted down the list a little bit. He's back at 35. A guy like Ivan Provorov has term on his deal as well. Do you think we'll get a stunner at some point here in the next hour 54? Or do you think it's going to be a lot of talking about ice cream and American Hockey League stories with our friends McKenna and Rosie?
I think the latter is probably more likely, right? I mean, I did see on Twitter earlier that Parayko hasn't been asked to waive his no movement clause yet. So if that's an indication, probably not likely. Like, I don't know. The way that I look at it is, you know, it's like a Besser and like I don't think anything is going to be like stunning off the board. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just seems like we've kind of used up all of our holy crap moments in the 8 days, 9 days prior to the deadline. And now we're kind of left with scraps and doing what we can with it.
If a team like Colorado could make the money work on a Kevin Hayes, who's at number 3, you see him right now on our board. He's one of those guys in the top 5 that has a little bit of term as well. He would be a real impact piece for that Avs team. And it's an Avs team, I know they've been banged up this year, but it's also hard to overlook like the loss of a guy like Nazem Kadri and how productive he was last year. Hayes feels like the perfect kind of missing piece for that Avs team. But it's, again, one of those deals, kind of like JT Miller in the Pittsburgh rumors and even Erik Karlsson in the Edmonton rumors, where it's like, man, damn the salary cap. Like, it's easier to do it in the summer when there's some flexibility. But Hayes is the one guy I'd watch in that top 5 because he could really help a team. Obviously, he's an all-star.
Yeah, not only that, I mean, it's been alluded to already, but like he's one of the most liked guys in the league. And you know, I think that adding him to a locker room where you know, outside of Philly where the vibes are much better, I think that he's going to be a really nice piece for a playoff run where you can get the camaraderie going. And Colorado's a good fit. I would look at Carolina too. I mentioned how much I think that they could use some reinforcement down the middle, like adding Kevin Hayes to the Carolina Hurricanes would be an interesting fit as well. I know that, you know, the money needs to work, but we found, especially with third-party brokers, where there's a will, there's often a way. So yeah. I don't pay so much attention to the money anymore. You know, I know that it's obviously important and you need to have the money work, but like I said, if you really want something to happen and you're willing to go out and be creative, there are ways to do it.
Yeah, there is that third-party broker. Everyone's got a price, and if you know you deal with the Arizona Coyotes, I mean, they'd probably do just about anything to get some fake cap space mixed in there. Pete, thanks for hopping in. We'll chat with you again in about 30 minutes' time. There have been not a lot of trades to break down unless our friend Nick Alberga has a really hot take on the Allard for Schnarr trade. Nick, you got insight there? Can you tell us how Nate Schnarr is going to fit into a lineup?
I think he's going to be massive. No, it's the Montreal Canadiens picking up a French player, so that's always a polarizing story. It's going to be on La Presse tomorrow in La Belle Province. But I'm more interested in Frank Seravalli. Like, what are the chances he's just ordering lunch right now? Do you think he's actually talking to a trade breaker or something like that?
Hey, I just ordered lunch a couple seconds ago. We're getting
There you go.
noodle dropped off at the office
Okay.
there. It looks like a pretty animated conversation that our pal Frank Seravalli's having. I'm waiting, like you can see behind him there. He's got
Yeah.
3 cans of Athletic Bruin. I'm waiting for how long in between deals until Frank just starts popping those things back too.
Now he's just looking at his phone. I'm calling bullshit on this, by the way. But let's dive into the Jacob Vrana trade from earlier today. Obviously, we came into this day, Tyler. We knew not much was going to transpire. The heavy lifting has been done. I can firmly say, as somebody who loves trades, I've got a fair dose of those over the last 8 days. It's been incredible. But you look at Jacob Vrana, like it really is a reclamation project. And certainly a lot has been going on around the scenes and behind the scenes there. He was in the AHL. There was some comments from the coaching staff in Detroit. It just was a bad marriage. It was a tough marriage headed towards divorce. And now we find the divorce here on deadline day. So essentially the Blues take a flyer. You see some retention in the deal. But let's not forget, the player on the ice is a really good player. 22 goals in 42 career games. Can you believe he only played 42 games as a member of the Detroit Red Wings? You think back, Tyler, a couple of years ago was Mantha for Vrana, and quite frankly, that deal has worked out for neither side at this point in time. So I actually like the piece of business. How many times have we seen in professional sports when a team takes on a reclamation project and suddenly they find it again? I think if there's a team to do it, maybe it's St. Louis, so they take a flyer. They gave up pretty much nothing for a guy who could potentially score at a pace of 40 goals. I don't mind it.
Yeah, that deal also had a first-round pick going one way as well, and that pick eventually found its way to the Dallas Stars because it was used on Wyatt Johnston. We were talking in the top 5 there, still Klingberg, Hayes, obviously JVR at number 1, but we've really dug into that. Klingberg, Hayes, Besser are the 3 there from 2 till 4. One of those guys, do you see a really natural fit for one of them on the market?
So I got good ties, as we all know, in Anaheim. I'm hearing it's very, very out there. And you guys brought it up earlier on with Klingberg. I mean, what a story. The money he said no to chase a bigger contract, it really is crazy. So he signs that flyer deal, the 1-year deal with the Anaheim Ducks. I mean, the AAV was pretty good, but he has not had a good year. And the Ducks in general have been a train wreck. We always laugh in the betting community about taking shot props against the Anaheim Ducks. It's the way to go. And it just hasn't been a great endorsement of a guy like John Klingberg. Who would have thought like 2 years ago we'd be sitting here and John Klingberg would still be readily available? And, sorry in the guy, but nobody really wants him at this point in time. If they did, they would have picked him up already. So that's a curious name for me. Obviously, the guys in Vancouver, I don't see it happening today. I just think it's too complex. If you look at Besser, if you look at Miller, I still have no clue what the Vancouver Canucks are doing. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the Hronek deal the other day with Detroit, but we can have an entire 3-hour special on the Vancouver and other teams like the Philadelphia Flyers too, right?
Yeah, you know what? That is a great one for later, because what some of these teams down towards the bottom of the standings have been up to with I like Frank Seravalli's Seinfeld joke because I love a good Seinfeld reference, the importer exporter. For some teams, I think like the Kraken, that's a position that like makes a lot of sense. You're going to be happy to get into the playoffs, but you also maybe want to keep an eye on the future. I think about the Red Wings as well and the number of picks that they've accumulated over the last couple of weeks, and I kind of go like, okay, I wonder if they could maybe want to give this group they have like just a little bit of a nudge and go work around the edges of their roster a bit. But for teams like Vancouver and Philly, I don't understand that having that angle at all because you're so far out of it.
Yeah, it's just fascinating because I mean, you look at this board, let's be honest, we're trying to sell this 4-hour special and we're doing a bang up job, by the way. I'm biased, but it's a time filler. I mean, a lot of activity and the biggest action has already happened. Notwithstanding maybe a monster move, you just never know in this situation.
Yeah.
But there's not really impact guys out there. That's why we're seeing names like Vlad Namestnikov go for the 4th time on deadline day. Like it's just the same old episode you're seeing over and over again, and understandable. But I think you look at some of these teams like Seattle, I'm right there with you. Like I give major props to Pierre Dorion. I mean, for a team who, in my opinion, is unlikely to still make the Stanley Cup playoffs, they're up against it, they're running out of racetrack. To give them a bit of a jolt is a nice touch, and the players' room can speak to that, what that means inside the locker room, to have faith and something come down from management down to say, hey, we believe in you guys, I think is a bit of a jolt. I would love to see that with Seattle. Obviously, they're fighting tie for their playoff flies right now, and they've been a great story this season. But adding a defenseman like that, depth is big this time of year, and I think you have to give your team a bit of a boost here.
Yeah, I think so. Detroit's the one for me. Like I know Stevie Y's got the Yzer plan going and all of that, but like the East, there's so many teams that are right there, and so many teams. You mentioned Pierre Dorian in Ottawa. I mentioned Detroit. We talked a little bit about Buffalo with McKenna and Rosie as well. Like these are teams where I think there is so much value for them in just getting meaningful hockey games played for some of the young pieces in their lineup, and that kind of experience can be invaluable at this time of year.
It really can be. And, I would even add, remember like a couple years back how teams did not want to give up draft picks. Like this year has been just the opposite, which I think is so ironic. Many considering the first round to be one of the best first rounds period ever, at least in the last 15 to 20 years, dating back to the early 2000s. And teams are flipping these picks like they're hotcakes, right? So I think from the Detroit perspective, they're accumulating draft picks right now, Tyler. I would not be shocked if the next move is either today or in the offseason, they go after a stud blue liner. I think that's what we're waiting for. And I think I give Steve Y credit as well for maxing out on a guy like Filip Hronek. That was a great deal for the Wings.
Yeah, I like that return, getting a first-round pick back in the process. Nick Alberga at the Golden Muzzy on Twitter and one of the co-hosts of Leafs Morning Take Monday through Friday. Let's head back into the players' room here as we continue hour 2 of our trade deadline show. Mike McKenna and Jay Rosehill. Gentlemen, it is. I saw, Rosie, you were up stretching your legs a little bit there, making sure you're staying nice and loose.
I was rolling a couple putts behind me. I got a little putting mat, and I mean, hey, for some of these teams that are making bullshit deals, they're going to be on the course soon. I figure I'll join them. But I do like how you said Nick Alberga, one of the co-hosts of our show. He likes to call himself the number 1 chair. I think more like the 1.5 chair is more appropriate these days.
Oh, you're carrying that show, eh, Rosie?
I am certainly not. I'm happy to have that guy and all his knowledge, but what do you got for us, Tyler? What's happening out there? Frank looks like he's busy. I always wonder who he's talking to. How do you become an insider? Who's sending you the inside information? People are just I just made a deal. Got to text Frank.
That's the secret sauce.
This feels so much like Wedding Crashers. Where Will Ferrell's Kara is like wondering what his mom's doing in the back. That's what we're wondering about Frank.
No, I was just going to say, like, the information just comes in dribs and drabs. So it's a pick and a player going back to the Anaheim Ducks for Dmitry Kulikov. I just don't know which pick and player yet. So we sit and wait.
So who's sending you that? Obviously, you don't want to give us a name, I'm sure, Frank, but is this a guy in the organization? I'm not even going to give you a team. Is it a media person? Is it a contact with the team? Like, where do you get most of your info?
They're all team contacts and people in the hockey world. It's very vague. We don't talk about how the sausage is made. I do not give away secrets. That's how it works.
You are a greasy man. Your life is filled with grease.
It's from the dark web.
Like literally, it is like literally filled with grease.
Yeah. And
let me jump in here for a sec, Frank. Sausage. Kulikov was number 11 on our trade board. He's going from Anaheim to Pittsburgh, correct?
That is correct. Anaheim to Pittsburgh. Yeah. They have no cap space in Pittsburgh, hence the player coming back in return and working on the pick as well.
All right, so we will keep our eyes on that one. Could be another player out of the top 15 gone off the trade targets board as Dmitry Kulikov is going to Pittsburgh. We'll wait until we get the full deal to talk to Alberga and Larkin and really break that bad boy down. But we can pick up the conversation. Like Pittsburgh, I mean, Granlund, okay, you gave up a second rounder for him. He's under control for another year. They're clearly committed to keeping or doing everything they can to keep that window open for Crosby, Malkin, and Letang and that core there. Do you think that Pittsburgh team, Mike, has enough gas in the tank here with these ads to go on a deep run, or do you think they're kind of a get in and get right out of the playoffs kind of thing?
Well, it's hard to ever discount Crosby and Malkin and the gang there, but it's been so up and down this season, and there's been such a lack of depth scoring that it's all run through their top couple lines. I just have a hard time thinking that Pittsburgh's going to be able to get it together to get past the first round, honestly, because you look at how tough that's going to be coming out of the East, and, there's not going to be any pushovers here with whoever they're going to face. So unless they, and I don't think it's going to be a one-player fix. Like Rosie, if you think differently, hop in here, man. But I don't think they can just go pick up one player that's going to put them over the top. They kind of tried to do that last year with Raquel and had a similar outcome, So I feel like that the Penguins really needed to take a fairly big swing in a few different positions and mimic what some of these other clubs are doing, adding all around to be able to contend. And right now, I think they're just kind of getting table scraps.
I think their big swing has already been done, and that's in the fact that they've committed to their core group of legends. You're obviously Crosby, and then the Malkin and the Letang, and it's like, are they going to break up this core? And there's so many good memories. And I mean, when you go to Pittsburgh, you see that center, and you're like, Crosby and Malkin built this thing. And when you realize what that organization was before, Mario took over and they got the Crosby pick, and then what happened after, that's just something that people aren't ready to move on from. And I think they had a choice of, these guys are not going to be winning us Stanley Cups anymore. They already have done that, and they have done their thing. And it's like, do we move on? And then what does the team look like? A bunch of scrappy names, and you're basically rebuilding, or do we keep these guys? Clearly, they're not in their prime anymore. They're not going to be beating the likes of the Boston Bruins, the New York Rangers, and they're not going to be getting it done in the East. So I feel like they kept them on to keep the fans happy, to keep the tickets sold, to keep the jerseys sold, and they have done that. And now when you add these table scraps, it's like, are they making a run? It's like, let's be honest, they're not making a run. They're not a good enough team to compete with the best of the best. They've done that. They've climbed to the top of the mountain. They've won Stanley Cups. They are absolute legends, and they keep them around because it's just hard to look at the Pittsburgh Penguins without that core group of players. And as long as they have them as their core group of players, they're aging, and they're not able to continue to win Stanley Cups, in my opinion. And that's where they sit right now. So to think that any trade that's going to make a difference on them making a run or not is silly in my mind.
Mike, we talked, Letang, Crosby, Malkin. That's the core. You maybe don't want to discount legends and what they could do in the playoffs because they've been through so many of those. But is it maybe more realistic to say the key to the Penguins surviving in the playoffs and surviving this playoff race as well? Could it be Tristan Jarry between the pipes? You're muted, Mike.
It's a big fact. I didn't want to talk over you earlier. It's a big factor why I think the Penguins need to explore the goaltending market. I just do. You got two goalies there who I really like on a personal level. I like their stories. I like the performance that Casey DeSmith has had previously in his career. But the last two seasons, I don't have the confidence that DeSmith could win you a playoff series. And at Tristan Jarry, when he's healthy, man, he's played some incredible hockey. But when he's in this never-ending cycle of coming back from injury, playing well, hurt again, coming back, taking a little bit, he hasn't been able to put together that full season or even into the playoffs. So if you're asking me, I think that that's a team that needs to explore goaltending. I also think defensively, right? They're pretty strong, but they're not as deep as some of the other clubs. I think they need help really at all three positions. I think you need forward depth. I think you need a better defense, and you need at least a secondary goaltender. The problem is if you're Ron Hextall, is it going to be worth giving up a third or fourth round pick to get a Cam Talbot or, somebody else that's available as a goalie if you don't really know if your team can contend? Exactly. That's the hard part for me. And I don't know the answer to that. If they're going to contend, they need to go to the goalie, but I don't know if they're going to get it. And I don't even know if that goalie is the one who's going to end up playing if they get him.
Oh, what's up, Frank?
So we do have some details on the Dmitry Kulikov trade. The Pittsburgh Penguins are sending forward Brock McGinn as well as a third-round pick to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for Dmitry Kulikov. And that's actually some pretty tidy business by the Pittsburgh Penguins because Brock McGinn had 2 more years on his contract. So they pick up the 2 years on McGinn's deal at $2.75 per. So Anaheim takes on some pretty significant salary in exchange for a third-round pick and defenseman Dmitry Kulikov heading to the Steel City.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, term still on this McGinn deal here. So Kulikov, 11 on our board. He's gone. Namestnikov, 12 on the board. He's gone. A third rounder going back to Anaheim as well. The Penguins own the Devils' third this year, their own and Vegas's in 2024, and their own in 2025 as well. Let's get some instant reaction to the Pittsburgh Penguins making an ad with our friend Nick Alberga. Nick, we were just talking about, the Penguins, can they be a team that makes a push? Do they have the ability to go deep with this aging core? What do you think about this deal here, them shoring up the blue line a bit?
I think we should hit our F-bomb quota for the show. What the fuck are the Pittsburgh Penguins doing, man? Like, not to be too critical of this team, but you look inside the division. I know Rosie's going to love that, by the way. We love to throw the F-bombs out on Leafs Morning Take. But jokes aside, I just have no clue, especially when you look, guys, at that division, the New York Rangers, the Carolina Hurricanes, the New Jersey Devils. Oh, yeah, you have the Boston Bruins. You have the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Toronto Maple Leafs. I understand this whole narrative owing it to Crosby and Malkin and Letang to go after it year after year. But this isn't the year to spark your team by picking up Dmitry Kulikov. He's going to fit in. He's a good fit. You'll put him with Jan Ruda probably in your bottom six. 5-6 pairing with Ruda there. And I think it adds certainly to that team. But I wouldn't think they're in a position to add. I think they should take approach that is doing, where it's sort of like a reset, a retool, looking longer term, saying, hey, we're going to sit out this year. If we make it, cool. If we don't, we don't. And then come back strong next year. But I think they continue to bury themselves. I don't know why they're involved in the Besser talks or the Miller talks. I have not been a big fan of what in the last couple months.
Yeah, they're trying to keep that window open. And I think we've seen, throughout kind of the salary cap era, that it can be dangerous when organizations just keep trying to hang on to the glory days. But we'll see if the Penguins get rewarded with another push year.
I was just going to see if I could offer a quick little rebuttal to Nick. If you look at the way this deal is structured, taking a third round pick back for Brock McGinn, like the Penguins actually getting off of McGinn for 2 more years at 2.75 is the bigger win. It's almost like Kulikov, the piece coming back, is the freebie that just clearing that cap space for the next 2 seasons, I think is extremely valuable in its own right. And technically, if you looked at it on a scale of money being assumed, it would cost you a lot more than that to have someone take on that kind of salary.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that, Frank. I think that's a good point for sure. Kulikov's going to add to that back end and to free up some money, especially in that world. I just meant in general, why they seem to be involved in these bigger where, the salary cap has been an issue. And I think you look specifically at their placement in the standings. They're fighting for their playoff lives right now. I just don't understand the whole mentality. I like the Capitals approach. I'll say that, Tyler.
Yeah, getting some picks in the process, getting a young D-man in Rasmus Sandin. Thank you for your insight, Nick. Let's grade a couple of the deals we've seen over the last hour here with Matt Larkin. Matt, we will start. Well, I'll get your take on Kulikov in a bit here, but we didn't get your thoughts on Namestnikov. Give me a grade for, I guess, the Jets adding some depth and also the Sharks kind of just buying a pick in a weird way.
For sure. Leading up to the deadline, the Jets are a team that I believed did not actually need as much high-end talent. That is already their identity. That top 6 forward group is already stacked. So you have Nikolai Ehlers, Kyle Connor, Pierre-Luc Dubois when he's healthy, Mark Scheifele, the list goes on and on and on. What this team badly needed was depth in that bottom 6, and I think they've shored it up really nicely. Of course, Nino Niederreiter already. And Vlad Namestnikov, what he brings is a forward who's pretty underrated defensively. 2019-20, he led the NHL in shorthanded goals. He can play all situations. He can play any wing. He can play center in a pinch. And I think that's actually what the Jets need, especially looking at the forward context. I know we've been talking about their need for some jam on defense. That's another discussion. But I give them a B for this trade. You can't really give a trade for Namestnikov higher than a B. He's a pretty low upside player, but I do think he fills a need. And the Sharks, it's a bit of a head scratcher for me when you factor in, if you look at the previous trade with Tampa Bay, basically they traded Michael Eyssimont for a 2025 4th-round pick, a 4th-round pick 2 years from now for a player who had established himself. Yes, he's older for a guy just breaking into the league, but this is a bona fide NHLer now. Analytics were good for Eyssimont, and you're just punting him for a pick in the 4th round in 2 years. Don't love it for San Jose. It's a D for the Sharks.
All right, and the one we just saw, Dmitry Kulikov going from the Ducks to the Penguins. It's it's Brock McGinn and his contract, and a third going back the other way. Grade this one up.
Yeah, I'm torn on it from Pittsburgh's perspective because I think Nick and Frank both make good points. It's hard not for me to look at the big picture for the Penguins and be disappointed in what they're doing. You have Kulikov, Bonino, and Michael Granlund coming in, and you have Brock McGinn and Teddy Blucher going out. This is a team that re-signed Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, Rickard Rakell in the summer. That was supposed to be sending the message, we're going to let it ride. And then leading up to the deadline, Ron Hextall pretty much advertises that his first-round pick is not on the table. That's not a great way to do business. As Pete said earlier on the show, where there's a will, there's a way. You could have used a third-party broker. You could have tried to do something bigger. I would have liked to see the Penguins, if they're supposedly all in, take a swing at someone like a Brock Besser, try and extend that championship window. Instead, this is just, I feel like it's Groundhog Day every year. The Penguins, you can tell the same story since the 2017 Cup. They're injured. They miraculously make the playoffs. They overcome. They get bounced in the first round. They're perpetually one of the oldest, smallest teams in the NHL. Nothing changes. Bringing in Kulikov, it doesn't really do much for me. On the other hand, as Frank said, getting away from that term for Brock McGinn, it is a nice move by Hextall. So I give the Penguins a B-. At the same time, supposedly the priority should be in the present. It's not necessarily about what you're doing next year and the year beyond. You need to be trying to win because Sidney Crosby, Evgeny Malkin, they're running out of good years. For Anaheim, I give them a C. You get a pick, which is great for Kulikov, who's sort of down in the lineup, a depth defenseman. At the same time, you're creating a new headache for yourself. You're bringing in Brock McGinn. You have to figure out what to do with that contract going forward. A C for the Anaheim Ducks.
And interesting too, like McGinn, 2 more years on that deal. Tristan Jarry, a UFA at the end of this season, and Jake Gensel 2 summers from now is going to be a UFA as well. And those would have been years McGinn was still on the book. So I do like that side of it from Hextall, and I do like your analysis today, Mr. Matt Larkin. You can find a bunch of stuff going up at dailyfaceoff.com as well. Larkin is on top of it. Pete Blackburn is a guy who I know has spicy takes on Dmitry Kulikov. He's a big Kulikov guy, flat out. Pete, the Penguins, does this move the needle for you at all? Does this make them any more of a threat in the East?
No, it honestly kind of feels like rearranging deck chairs a bit. And I get the, the getting away from Brock McGinn's deal and how there's value there. But like in the bigger picture, why the hell do you take on Mikael Granlund's deal then? Like what's going on here? Like, I think they lose credit for getting those savings when you take on another bad deal and then you're kind of strapping yourself. It's like 1 in, 1 out, and you don't really have any major movement. So I don't think they've gotten any better. I don't think that they've positioned themselves all that much better moving forward. It just feels like making trades for the sake of making trades. And I think they're exactly in the same position as they were, which is not relevant.
Fair. When you look at the East, I mean, the race is purely in the wild card spot because you can look at Carolina, New Jersey, and the Rangers, bang, locked up. Boston, Toronto, Tampa, bang, locked up. If you were one of those top seeds, so Boston in the Atlantic or whoever ends up winning the Metro, which one of those teams in the wild card race would you not want to face? Pens, Sabres, Islanders, Sens, Panthers. Is there one of those that does strike fear into you?
No, not really. I mean, I think that you look at all those teams in the wild card spot, and they're all pretty flawed. And I guess like the one, if Florida were to make it in there, they have enough of the bones of like last year's team where they clearly did some damage and were successful. But, I think that a lot of those factors that made them successful last year just haven't carried over. So like this year's team is different from last year's team. And so I look at any of those 5 teams in the wild card spot, and there is a mile gap between what you have in the top 3 spots in both of those divisions. So no, I'm not scared of any of them.
It's been relatively quiet. What have you been doing to kill time? I have my iPad here. I might start playing like this brick breaker game I'm super into right now. But have you been passing the time with anything?
Trying to decide if there's enough time between my hits for me to like squeeze in a Warzone game while monitoring TweetDeck on one of my other monitors and just seeing if any trade comes through. But I don't think I've got enough time in between these hits.
I believe in you. I believe in you. All right, there you go. Pete Blackburn from Valley Sports checking in once again here on our Daily Faceoff Live trade deadline edition. And we are bumping on the YouTube, just north of 2,000 watching there. And I had my pal Liam behind the scenes look into our numbers from last year. We had about 5,000 total viewers. We are already over 10,000. So if you're watching on the YouTube, do us a solid and hit that subscribe button. We are under 90 minutes away from the NHL trade deadline. So if you're just joining us, let's recap what we've seen so far. Earlier this morning, it was Jacob Vrana at 50% retained, going to the St. Louis Blues. Going back the other way as a minor league forward in Dylan McLaughlin and a 7th-round pick in 2025. Nick Bonino is going back to the Pittsburgh Penguins as well, a guy who had a fantastic run throughout the playoffs with the Pens, and there was some money retained in there, a third-party team, some picks going around that deal. Nick Bonino from the Sharks to the Pens. Curtis Lazar is going to the New Jersey Devils from the Vancouver Canucks, a 2024 4th-round pick in that deal. A player-for-player swap between the Kings and the Flyers. Zach McEwen and his $925,000 cap hit. He goes to the Kings. The Flyers scoop up Brendan Lemieux, who is at 1.35 on the cap. They also get a 5th-round pick in the deal. But for the Kings, they free up a little bit of money. Maybe a team that could still go make a bit of a splash here in the final, I'll be exact, 85 minutes and 10 seconds until the deadline hits. Let's go back to the players room with Mike McKenna and Jay Rosehill. And I did task you guys before the show started. I gave you a little bit of homework last night. And Mike, I'll start with your assignment. And you are the goalie guru at Daily Faceoff. And we haven't really seen a significant goalie move outside of the Jonathan Quick and Korpisalo thing, with Quick now ending up in Vegas. Before we get to some other guys, what's your take on the Golden Knights scooping up Quick? Do you like that potential revenge narrative? Or are you kind of scratching your head going, I probably could have gotten someone better than that?
Yeah, I don't think this was a very good play. I have no other way to say that. I've talked to a lot of people and watched with my own eyes and just come to the conclusion that this season, the only reason the Kings couldn't waive Jonathan Quick is because his name's Jonathan Quick, and he was a franchise icon, right? Like, his level of play has not been NHL level, frankly, and he hasn't been above league average more than once in the last 5 years in terms of save percentage or goals saved above average. Take any metric that you want. And the Kings are a better defensive team than people realize, right? Phoenix Copley's been at about a 90% save percentage, and he's won 3/4 of the games he's played. Okay. That team, the Golden Knights, they're number 1 in defense in terms of high danger chances. Kings 7th. And Quick was on his way out of Dodge. Now, for the Golden Knights, you know, if they needed a goaltender, which apparently they do, considering Logan Thompson's on LTIR, you don't know when he's going to be coming back. He's not on the ice currently. Laurent Brossoit's hurt again after coming back from off-season hip surgery. You're basically left with Aiden Hill and what would have been Michael Hutchinson, and that was it. So it makes sense to go get a goalie, but I look at how many goalies were available that have played quality minutes, right? But they're not Jonathan Quick. They don't have 2 Stanley Cups to their resume. They don't have memories of the time where he was the best goalie in the NHL. It's been a long time since that's been the case. And man, I go down the list: Talbot, Grice. I mean, there's a Reimer, DeSmith. Like, there's a lot of names that I think could have even fit. Even Anton Hudobin or Alex Nedeljkovic, I think you could have tossed into that mix of goaltenders that I would have taken a flyer on for the rest of the season ahead of them. Because look at how consistent Reimer's been. Okay, like, this is the first year Reimer's been at below a 9. I don't think Reimer would have been my answer. It would have been Talbot or Korpisalo or Thomas Greiss. Those would have been my top 3. But they went with Jonathan Quick. So if they're just trying to get minutes out of Quick down the stretch here, Tyler, and play some games and be in tandem with Aiden Hill until Logan Thompson gets back, okay, fine. Because under Bruce Cassidy, Quick's going to win games. And he'll probably look good in doing so in a couple of the others. But the way he plays, man, there has been no evolution or adaptation or innovation to his game in the last decade. And I think it's passed by, and that's why his numbers have looked like what they have, and why he was outplayed by a 3rd or 4th goaltender in Phoenix Copley by a large margin all season long. So I think it'll probably be fine for Vegas if they don't have to rely too heavily on Quick. But if he's going to be their guy in playoffs, I don't like that. I think they had better options on the table.
Fair. When you look at this list of 10 goalies to potentially keep an eye on here at the deadline, is there a fit out there? Is there a team that you're eyeing up going, you probably need a little bit of insurance here?
Well, yeah, we talked briefly. I think Pittsburgh's the one club because LA addressed it. I thought LA and Pittsburgh going to this deadline were the two that I thought really could have used a bit of help. And so, Cam Talbot to me is your best guy available. I know the Sens have been on a run, but it had been reported that Talbot had turned down an extension there in Ottawa, that talks had gone nowhere. So apparently he's gone. If that's the case, I think if you're Pierre Dorion, you'd be smart to move him. The problem is that you need to get a goalie back the other direction. So that's why I thought going for Korpisalo maybe from the Blue Jackets would have made a lot of sense. That didn't pan out. Korpisalo went to the LA Kings. So Talbot for Pittsburgh, boy, that'd be a good fit, because if Jari's not healthy, if you don't think dismiss your guy, you could plug Talbot in no problem there, I think, and have some good hockey played with him. Grice to me would be your backup. He'd be your insurance plan. And Vejmelka is a guy that I think if you're a team like, even like New Jersey with Blackwood. Blackwood's been hurt nonstop. What if New Jersey wanted to have a Vejmelka Vanacek combo? The only wrench that's been thrown into it is that Akira Schmidt has been awesome, like really good. Like he's a little bit ahead of the curve, I think, in terms of his development. I thought he'd be ready like a year from now. So I think it's a pretty weak market for goalies. I don't think there's many teams that are going to look for help. I've heard Buffalo's name dropped. I don't know. They got a 3-headed monster right now anyway, so maybe if they could move Comrie's deal, that could happen. But I think Talbot is your number one batter right now. And you go down beyond him. I mean, I've got 10 goalies. I got Talbot, Grice, Vejmelka, Blackwood, DeSmith, Stolars, Reimer, Nedeljkovic, Gibson. Most of them are going to take extenuating circumstances. So if you're a contender, Talbot's your guy.
Fair enough. And yeah, a lot of them, like you talked about, right? Like if Blackwood or DeSmith goes, someone's got to come in and fill that void. So it seems like it could be a bit of a complicated goaltending market, and could be why we haven't seen a lot of movement on that front. Jay Rosehill, I gave you a different sort of homework assignment here. I wanted you to take a look at some general managers from around the league coming into today, and who you like the most, whose work has been the best. And this is the 5. Take us through your list.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the rankings of what I think is going to come to fruition, but it's who's made, for the most part, the most splash, the most noise. And Chris Drury obviously added a whole bunch to the New York Rangers, and we talked about it already here with who they added. Big names, powerful players. They're already a good team. Did they make their team better? Absolutely. I think there's a question of where those guys, the Tarasenkos and the Patrick Kanes, how they fit, where they fit, what do they do? Do they disrupt the balance of the locker room? When you look at the rosters that have changed, I think that's one that has made the most splash. And I think because of that, could cause the most disruption to not the locker room. I'm not saying they're bad character guys or anything, but just the presence that they hold and what they expect and what they are going to command with that roster. Doesn't make it better. It does on paper. Whether that comes to fruition or not, it's tough to see. I mean, Tom Fitzgerald obviously made a big move. Everyone's talking about Timo Meier through the entire, wrap of the trade deadline here. They got him. I think he was the most important forward up for grabs. In the trade deadline coming in, they've obviously made that move. They're making a push. I don't think they were talked about as much, in the previous months before trade deadline started to be talked about. Now they're on the map. And then Kyle Dubas has obviously made a big change. He went all in. You changed 6 players on your roster, and they're all reasonable changes. They're all changes that are warranted, are wanted. It's things that they've been crying for. I think they've addressed depth. They've addressed defense. They've addressed experience. They've addressed leadership. And I think they've gotten better. And, last night they pull off a 1-goal win against the Calgary Flames. I like the way, you could say they were getting dominated in the first half of that game, but the Toronto Maple Leafs problem in my mind are when they get behind the 8 ball, they don't seem to be able to gain control back. They tend to spin their wheels. And you see that in the playoffs over the last handful of years where they've got a great team. They've got this powerful offense. Everyone's worried about their defense and their goaltending, but in the playoffs, they get down a goal. It's a 3-2 game and there's 7 minutes left. And it's like, okay, tilt the ice, pepper the goalie, get that big goal, have your big paid, big stud guys do what they need to do, and they just can't do it. They can't find the ice. They can't get entry with speed. They can't find that open backdoor play. They just are pushed to the outside and their wheels are spinning. And last night was a nice caveat where they did change the game. They were behind the 8 ball. I know that the shots and the chances is whatever, but they were getting dominated in that game. I was at it live. And somehow in the third period, they managed to grind out a win. And that's something huge for the Toronto Maple Leafs that I feel like Kyle Dubas and the changes that he made can only help them get better going forward. They've addressed some of their problems, and it's not just defense and goaltending. It's that scoring the goal, and it's not even scoring the goal. It's getting the momentum and getting the bench to be riding a high where you can tilt that ice, put a team on their heels, and tie that game or get the go-ahead goal in the playoffs, which is absolutely what they've been missing to get over that hump. They've been so goddamn close in the past 3, 4, 5, 6, 20 years, and they just haven't got it done. And I was happy to see what they did last night. The Boston Bruins, man, they scare me. I mean, the only thing that makes my heart hurt right now is that the Toronto Maple Leafs are such a good team, and they're making a push, and they're in a division where exists the Boston Bruins. I mean, they are so deep. They are so deadly. You watch Allmark the other night in whether it was Calgary or Edmonton, but like you're watching a game and there's like a break and it's an odd man rush and it's like this, and all the excitement gets to a high and the voices of the commentators go high, and Allmark just literally takes away 3/4 of the net and it just bounces off his pad, and it's a joke for him. He seems so poised. He seems so collected. Mike McKenna, you can certainly touch on this. I watched Allmark the last couple of games and I'm just like, my God, he's got the potential to just steal a series, let alone a game. And then he's got all that firepower in front of him. It makes me actually quite scared. And then number 5, I was talking about the Nashville Predators. I wanted to do something a little bit different, as they're making moves, but it's not as in they're pushing their chips to the table and trying to make a run. They're actually saying, hey, we're not in the mix this year. We're talking long-term, whether, David Poile has got some tenure and he thinks he's going to be around for a long time. He's like, I'm not worried about my job. I'm not panicking. I'm going to start getting prospects, getting draft picks, putting myself in a position where in 2 years, now we're talking about the Nashville Predators, and that's a guy who can look really smart. It's hard to do in this day and age where it's a what have you done for me lately, but I think they're positioning themselves down the road, and they're one of the few teams that's maybe more of a seller than a buyer as far as making a push, and they're putting themselves in position for down the road, which is kind of cool to see too. And you need to think long term with some of these teams as well.
I like this list here, but
with Nashville too. I mean, I think Poile's done a pretty decent job of setting the table for Barry Trotz, who's going to be coming in as general manager this coming summer. So, I think that's part of it, is that you want to hand off a team to your buddy that's going to be able to now do what he wants to mold the franchise as he pleases. I thought the Ekholm deal was a little underwhelming, how that, retaining a little bit of salary and what they managed to get kind of surprised me. But there's some teams on here, man, Rosie, that like they're all good and they've all improved. But out of these the 4 clubs here that are contenders, the Jersey is my question mark. Like, Rosie, do you think they can really compete with these other teams right now? Are they ready to do that with their lineup? That team's been awesome, no doubt in my mind, but are they mature enough to be able to compete against the big dogs?
It doesn't look like it on paper. They've gotten better. They've made a push. They've put themselves in the conversation. Let's just say that. And crazy things do happen. I mean, did anyone predict that, was it the President's Trophy winners, the Florida Panthers last year, where everyone's hot and heavy and panting over and they get swept in the first round? Things like that happen. So if the landscape starts to change after the first round, we can talk about that. But as far as where we sit right now, I'm just worried about the Maple Leafs fucking competing in this East, let alone the New Jersey Devils. They've got a good team. They've made some moves. Have they made positive strides towards being better? Absolutely. But as far as, I mean, we haven't even talked about the Carolina Hurricanes. There's some depth in the East that is honestly scary, and my heart hurts. I said it because I'm following the Maple Leafs, and that's the team that I got my eye on, and I'm emotionally invested in this team. They're making a push. They're as good as they've ever been in 20 years, and it's like, look who they have up to come up against. I mean, Boston is scary. The Tampa Bay Lightning are what they are. They've been to 3 cup finals in a row where no one's really, calling them the greatest. Last year, they could have easily been beat by Toronto, and they make it all the way to the Stanley Cup finals. And the New York Rangers have added super, super depth. I mean, Adam Fox and Patrick Kane and Zibanejad and Panarin and Tarasenko and McCullough. It's just scary. And you get their goaltenders involved too, which as much as anybody is such a huge, huge part of a playoff push. It's not up for grabs. It's which powerhouse is going to come out of this thing. And it's kind of scary to watch, because I hope something happens. I hope it's not status quo or the Boston Bruins just run their way, because it would be kind of boring. I want to see if something can be shaken up with these rosters that they put in place here, especially in the East.
Frank Seravalli in the Athletic Brewing Insider Cam. It's quiet right now, but we are still breaking down kind of what we've seen over the last couple of weeks here. Mike, I want to float you a question kind of based off Rosie's rankings there, where we saw 4 GMs in the East, and the only Western GM he named is a GM in David Poyle, who was selling ahead of the deadline, picking up assets for guys like Ekholm and Granlund. It's been an absolute arms race out East, and for the most part, the West has been largely quiet here. You had the Stars getting Domi, sure, good move, but now they're quiet again. The Jets pick up a couple of depth forwards. Okay, great, quiet again. The Oilers get Ekholm and Bukestad, and it sounds like they're done for the day. Or is there a team in the West? Because the path for some of these guys, where I'm going with this is I'm surprised there wasn't a team in the West who looked at the inactivity in that conference and said, my path to a cup final might be easier than it's ever been, and that GM pushes their chips into the middle just based off that.
Didn't you think Colorado would be one of those teams? Just looking at how they were really aggressive last year and grabbing Lehkonen and Manson, and even the bid players, right? Getting Cogliano and a really smart move there in advance, even over the summer, was grabbing Darren Helm. Like, he was really good for them last year. But I've wondered about them bulking up. And I think that part of it is that the East knows they got to get things done, or you're not going to come out of the East. And in the West, like a team like Vegas, it feels like Vegas kind of struck out on all the big dogs. And I don't know how or why, whether, they're probably in on Meyer and couldn't put the package together to get him that they wanted to. Mm-hmm. They needed a right winger in Vegas. They needed a scoring winger in Vegas, and they didn't get one. Like, they got Barbashev, who is a quality third line player to me. Okay. But he's not a goal scorer by a 30-40 goal. You're right. Pacioretty's gone there. They don't have it. So that part kind of surprised me. And I thought that Edmonton would step up and do more than they did. I like picking up Ekholm. I didn't like the way it was done, but I thought that they give up Barrie, which shocked me, right? You gave up a roster piece to try to be better. So I think the long and the short of it here is that what I'm saying is that the West is clearly going to win the Stanley Cup, because the East has done all these arm races, and they're going to beat each other up so much that the Dallas Stars are just going to waltz right into backdoor in a Stanley Cup victory on the back of Jake Ottinger and the Renaissance that's happening at center with Jamie Benn. And Jason Robertson's going to carry that thing all around town. And we're all going to look back and go, wow, the East spent so much to get trounced by a team from the West who nobody really expected. And Jim Nill picked up Max Domi. And that was the one it took. So there's my big prediction, guys. That's what's going to happen.
I like it. And you're talking about the West. I mean, they've been talking about Dallas for a while. I mean, I loved what they were putting together with the Sagan and the Benz, and you got some depth and Ottinger and everything else. And it seems like they've been one of those teams that's just trying to claw their way off the first round, and like the Dallas Cowboys of their division, where it's like they're supposed to be good. Everyone's hoping they're good, and they keep falling short, and they're trying to put pieces together. And, being from where I'm from, I look at the Calgary Flames, you look at July 1st and they don't know if they're going to hold on to their studs in their franchise with Tkachuk may or may not go. Johnny Gaudreau, I honestly don't think the market loved Johnny Gaudreau. He was too soft. He was scared. He's a mama's boy. He's a young little mommy boy that just needs to be close to her. I mean, his number one comments about the bubble in COVID was, it's just really hard not being able to see my mom every month. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? So he was happy to go. We lose to Chuck, but we get these big boys in the back. Uyghur is supposed to be like Cale Makar type player. Jonathan Huberdeau is supposed to make a huge splash, and it just hasn't happened. You got Jacob Markstrom. I mean, maybe he's the guy that can, hold the fort down while these guys get their footing. He's become just every game, Mike, it's the first 2, 3, 4, 5 shots, 2 goals go in, and the Calgary Flames are constantly playing against the 8 ball. And you're trying to figure out, what are we supposed to do? And the thing that keeps coming up that no one's talking about is Dustin Wolf is in the American League. I don't know how much you know about him, Mike, but he's sitting there. He's putting up massive numbers. And it's not like Brent Sutter is a guy who's going, oh no, we're gonna coddle our babies, we're gonna coddle Markstrom, we're gonna give him a chance, because he just pulls out every goalie. They play one game in, one game out. He pulls them every chance. And I understand his train of thought. He's sitting there going, does anyone want this opportunity? I'm giving you a shot, 60 minutes in the NHL. Take the opportunity. You can be our number one. He's doing that to Vladar and to Markstrom, and both of them just can't seem to get their footing and grab that spot and say, I'm ready, I'm going to get a hot streak going on. So Sutter just keeps rolling them in and out, and the Flames fans are pulling their hair out going, how are we supposed to win? We thought we were a contender this year. We thought we got the best out of the deal in the summertime when we brought on these huge names to replace 2 guys that just left. Everything was looking real rosy for the Calgary Flames, and they have just had an abysmal season, mostly due to goaltending. They've got the second least amount of shots against them all year long. You can't argue that they're not helping out their goaltenders. The goaltenders just can't stop anything. And then here you have one of the best goaltender in the American League with Dustin Wolf, and they haven't given him a shot. It's kind of like, at what point do you disrupt that tandem on the Calgary Flames and say, sorry, Marky, we know you were a Vezina potential last year. You're not getting it done. Here's a big boy to come in and say, do you want to be a big boy now or what? Are you ready for it? And his numbers say that he is. But again, that's the American League.
Here's the hard part. That Calgary team's been okay all year. They haven't been terrible. They've just been mid. They've been okay all year. They've been in the second wildcard spot and out of it all season long. And
which is disappointing.
I know that. And I agree with you, because I thought that Brad Treelin got a shit sandwich last year. Like, you're getting Gaudreau and Tkachuk are leaving. How are you going to replace this? But there's another layer to that sandwich. Like, there's a little bit of whipped cream on the dog turd that Oliver Shillington hasn't played all season long. And he's been a big hole on the back end for that team. I know what you're saying about not facing a lot of shots, but the quality of shots that they give up when things break down in Calgary are real high. I watched every single goal that Markstrom's allowed this year. I did a deep dive on it on Daily Faceoff. And Markstrom, the one thing you touched on that's right about it, he has had a tendency to let up a goal early in the game. That's been the biggest thing for him. And there's been a couple of head scratchers that have looked really bad. But, when he wasn't getting wins and the team scored 1 goal or less in 13 games that he started, he's not getting any run support. Like, they're mid-pack in goals against average. They haven't been able to score the way they should. And a lot of that to me is on Huberdeau. And whether it's right, wrong, and different, Huberdeau, Kadri, like, you bring them in, you expect it. True. They gave the ball to Vladar for a little while, and Vladar deserved it. Vladar was winning games, and then when he started to play a bit more, the same thing started to happen to him as Markstrom. So I don't think it's a goalie thing. I don't think you bring up Wolf and just, this is your answer. Although at this point, it's at a nuclear stage. I wouldn't mind seeing that, Rosie, just to shake it up. But how do you fit that with cap? You got to bring another up, roster space, those things.
You're hoping for it's almost like you're hoping for an injury to give this guy a shot to shake something up.
I don't disagree, because like goaltending was a real big position of strength for Calgary, right? You had Markstrom as your clear-cut number one, and Vladar, man, like he should be an NHL number one eventually here. He should be, but he's on a really team-friendly contract for a little bit. He's got term on his left. But Wolf has been the best in the American League for 2 years now. So it should be strength. It's almost like a Binnington situation. What would happen if you did toss Wolf in? What if there was an injury and he started to win games for him? I just don't think, what the biggest factor is? I don't think they're having any fun at Calgary. Well, I don't think so. No. Rosie, do you disagree with me? I don't think that team's having fun. And I think it starts with the top on down. Like with Satsi, man, I just don't think that. I don't think
100% you're not having fun. I love the Sutters. I love what they do, but I know that when things are going wrong, it's eggshells. And you know what it's like to walk into a locker room every single bloody day on eggshells. And I mean, I don't think Jonathan Huberdeau is a guy that has the personality or the background or the cultural experience to to be that Alberta guy, to be that Sutter guy, to say, God damn
Florida
right, let's
was
put
a
our boots
country
on, let's go to
club.
bloody work. He's driving his
Yeah.
fucking baby blue Lamborghini in his flip-flops with his golf clubs in the back or the trunk or wherever the hell you put golf clubs in a Lambo. And now he's in Calgary with Daryl Sutter down his throat. And it's not easy for him. And he hasn't responded well to it. Does that mean it's not going to happen? No. He's got an 8-year deal there. Does that come into play where maybe his panic button isn't as mashed, or he's just going to ride it out and see if Sutter gets changed out? But at the end of the day, when you look at the Flames, I do think that if they had last year's goaltending, we wouldn't even be talking about them at this length right now. They'd be in the mix, they'd be in the hunt. We'd be talking about adding pieces and blah blah blah. But right now, they're off the mark. And like you say, they're not in the basement. They're not out of the mix by any stretch. But for what they were expected to be and where they are, it's not good enough. And it's almost like if Vladar could just get hurt or something, and you could bring Wolf in, and we know goalies can't play back-to-backs anymore. I'm sure you've played how many 4 and 5s in your bloody career. Now you can give Wolf a shot now and see if he's got what it takes, because he's not just some prospect. He is the stud of all studs that's not in the NHL, and you got a big goaltending problem right now. Maybe him and Markey can switch hit each other. Who knows? But right now, the Flames are a disappointment in the West, I think.
Gentlemen, I love the passion from you guys. I love this breakdown. We are getting close, 30 seconds away from the 1-hour warning of the trade deadline. So we're going to do a little reset here, and I'm going to go through the top 35 on Frank Seravalli's trade targets board. Real quick rip through this top 35. JVR, he is number 1. John Klingberg at number 2. Frank reporting earlier today, maybe it's Tampa. Maybe it's a team like the Seattle Kraken, both of them having maybe some interest in a guy like John Klingberg. Kevin Hayes at 3, Brock Besser at 4, Jacob Vrana, he is off the board at number 5, going from Detroit to the St. Louis Blues. At number 6 on Frank Seravalli's trade targets board, Nick Bonino is off the board, gone back to Pittsburgh, where he had that success in the Stanley Cup run. Colton Parayko in at number 7, Connor Sherry at number 8, a winger in Washington. Troy Stetcher, depth D-man in Arizona. Justin Hall at number 10. Frank's talked throughout the week about that large amount of the big number of D-men that the Leafs have, guys getting scratched. We'll see if the Leafs find a new home for a guy like Justin Hall. At number 11, we have Dmitry Kulikov, who is the most recent deal we've gotten here on deadline day. He is out in Anaheim. He is in with the Pittsburgh Penguins. Brock McGinn and a 3rd rounder going the other way there. Vladislav Namestnikov is a Winnipeg Jet. It feels like every deadline Vlad Namestnikov gets moved. He goes from Tampa to San Jose and then up to Winnipeg in exchange for a 4th rounder. Logan Stanley has reportedly asked out in Winnipeg. Those are the rumblings. He comes in at number 13. Carson Soucy at 14. Ivan Provorov in at number 15. A D-man with some term out in Philly. At number 16 on the board, Nick Schmaltz of the Arizona Coyotes. Again, a guy with 3 more years on the cap, $5.85 million. Lawson Krause is in at number 17, similar position as Schmaltz, an Arizona Coyotes forward with some term, 4 more years on that deal. Jordan Greenway, the big winger out in Minnesota, 2 more years at an AAV of $3 million, and his teammate Matt Dumba is right behind him on the list, a pending UFA in Mini. Noah Gregor at number 20, 24-year-old centerman for the San Jose Sharks, making just $950,000 against the cap this year. Jonathan Drouin of the Canadiens at 21. Dante Fabro, we've heard some smoke around Dante Fabro in the last week. Another pending RFA, just 1 goal in 56 games this year, though, on the Predators' blue line. Craig Smith, who the Capitals picked up as kind of part of a cap dump a couple of weeks ago in that Orlov and Hathaway deal. He comes in at number 23. Morgan Geekie in Seattle, and Philip Zadina is at number 25 as we move towards the bottom part of the list. Christian Dvorak in Montreal, Marco Scandella in St. Louis, Connor Garland in Vancouver, Will Borgden, a right shot D-man with the Seattle Kraken, and in LA, it's a duel. Sean Walker or Matt Roy, either one of them could potentially be on the move as the Kings look to change up the look of their team down the stretch. Colin White at 31, Sean Monahan at 32, Radko Gudas at 33, Joel Edmondson, who played last night and appears to be healthy, at 34, and JT Miller in at number 35. It is just after 2 o'clock Eastern time, which means we're only 57 minutes away from the NHL trade deadline. Let's have another check-in with our friend Pete Blackburn. And Pete, as I sit here under the studio lights at Nation HQ in Edmonton, I'm starting to sweat a little bit, but I want to ask you, which fan base do you think is sweating the most right now with the idea that, man, we are less than an hour away and our GM maybe still hasn't done enough?
Yeah, the two teams that I keep going back to are Dallas and Carolina. And I know Carolina's made some moves, and maybe you're happy with what you got there. And I do think that the Puljujarvi and Gostisbehere trades are good value for Carolina, but I'm still worried about what they have down the middle. It's something I've been saying for weeks, still remains for me, especially in that Eastern Conference arms race. And then in the Western Conference, I think that Dallas has, areas where they can improve, especially offensively and on the power play. And a guy that I like for Dallas in terms of a fit would be Brock Besser. And I think Besser would be a good fit for either of those teams. I know Don Waddell doesn't like rentals. Besser's got term. He has, a finishing ability and ability to score goals that I think would help both of those teams. So I'm looking at both of those, and maybe I'm a bit locked in on it, but that's kind of where I'm seeing two teams that could improve as long as the price is right.
Our friends at PointsBet Canada have updated odds on the Stanley Cup, Pete, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. Your Boston Bruins are up at the top at plus 400, so 4-1. The Avs in at second, 6-1, followed by the Canes at 7-1, the Leafs at 8-1, and then you get to the Rangers at 10-1. You actually don't get another Western Conference team until the Edmonton Oilers at 12-1. The Stars are 14, Golden Knights are 15. Listen, I know like the Bruins are looking borderline unbeatable right now, and taking them at 4-1 actually doesn't even feel like a bad spot. But I want to get your take on a team maybe lower down. Like, I mean, I mentioned those teams out west. You got New Jersey and Tampa both at 12-1 as well. Is there one of those lower down teams that you look at and go, they might be a sneaky good Stanley Cup bet?
I mean, as long as the Devils can get decent goaltending through the playoffs, like I know that they're a young team and they're a bit ahead of schedule, but like the Timo Meier fit there is incredible to me, and I think that team got a lot better. As long as you kind of can get good goaltending and get a hot hand, I don't see any reason why they can't make a deep run, and I think they've got value there at 12-1. Outside of that, I mean, I think Colorado's that high because number one, they're good, but also because who in the West are you taking other than Colorado? I think that's like the slam dunk to me. I don't, obviously they've had their struggles in terms of staying healthy and stuff, but at this point, I think I might take Colorado at like 75% over most of the teams in the Western Conference. So, yeah, I don't like the Rangers plus 1,000. Honestly, it's just like there's something about the Rangers to me that I think is being overhyped. I don't think they're good enough defensively, and so I would take my money and put it on the Devils before I put it on the Rangers.
Fair enough. Thanks again, Pete. We so far today, I'm just looking at the recap again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 deals so far on deadline day. Pete, how many? Give me your take. How many are we getting in the final 53 minutes?
I mean, there's always the ones that trickle in like right after the deadline too. So you got to figure those.
What's the final number then?
I'm going to say at least double digits. Let's say 11. Let's say 11. We'll get 5 in the final hour. None of them, I would be surprised if any of them really shocked me.
After going for north of 2 hours with only 6, I would very much like 5 or 6 deals in the final 50 some odd minutes here. Thank you very much, Pete Blackburn, for jumping on again. He'll be with us a couple more times before the end of our show here. Let's go back to our pal Nick Alberga out in Toronto. Nick, PointsBet Canada, you're familiar with them from Leafs Morning Take. I want to get your thoughts on the question I just threw Pete's way. The Stanley Cup odds. Allow me to be a homer for a second, but Vegas and Edmonton might have the easiest paths to the conference final out of anyone across the league. They are 12 and 15-1. I don't hate those spots just because they might be able to breeze past a couple of teams in rounds 1 and 2.
Yeah, Ty, I've been saying that for a while. I think if you're looking from value for a futures perspective, it's in the Western Conference. With all due respect to the East, there's just so many juggernaut teams. So automatically you're looking at Colorado. I mean, there's a reason why they're number 2 on the list. You know, obviously Cale Makar and his health is a vast concern, I would say, right now for that team. Looks like he's closing in on a return. What happens with Gabe Landeskog? When you have those many guns and you won it last year, how could you not bet on Colorado? But certainly there is a pathway for teams like Edmonton. You know, the goaltending still scares the hell out of me, but you look up front, you look at the season Connor McDavid's put together. Now you pick up Matthias Ekholm, like the Winnipeg Jets quite a bit. But in general, I just think it's wide open. You know, it's not like everybody's anointing the Colorado Avalanche or everything, but like there's a pathway there for teams like Winnipeg, like the Edmonton Oilers, as you mentioned, and others, the Vegas Golden Knights to an extent. I mean, a lot of me wonders about Mark Stone and his availability. If you don't have him in the Stanley Cup playoffs, I'm not sure how they match up against like an Edmonton or something like that. And even I wouldn't sleep on Los Angeles. Like as Mike mentioned earlier on, I like the Korpisalo pickup. Phoenix Copley's been a great story. You bring in Gavrikov. Andrei Kopitar, I think, has 13 goals in the last 14 games. Love the Fiala pickup. But for me, it just screams that I don't know if the Western Conference teams actually think they're legit this year, or maybe the East is too strong because nobody's really stepped up and done much, you know, in terms of significance.
You talked about Connor McDavid and the Oilers there. McDavid and the Oilers taking on the Jets tonight in one of the many deadline game days around the NHL. I kind of wish the NHL would go dark on this day. No, like just there's 5 games on the schedule. Make it work so deadline day is just quiet. And then I think it's kind of a letdown for the fans when your team goes and potentially makes a splash on deadline day. Then it's like, oh, we got to wait like 3 more days to see our guy in action. Make this day dark, make it a travel day, and then boom, have a full slate the day after with a bunch of guys in their new cities.
It's just a struggle in this world, though, right, Ty? Like we're trying to finish the season as quickly as possible. I think it's important to note too, we never see the deadline on a Friday, and I believe due to the schedule and the way the season ends and stuff like that, and the amount of days before the season ends, they put it on a Friday this year. From what I understand, and Frank probably could speak better to this, I think it's going to go back to Monday coming up next year. But we really did see a domino effect. But I do think you're onto something. I think logistically, it's just not going to happen from that perspective, because I do agree. Like, I think it's so important. And Rosie and I talk about this a lot in Leafs Morning Take, to humanize the situation, right? Like these lives are being greatly affected by a phone call pretty much, or a text or a DM. You never know how these guys are finding out right now.
There you go, Nick Alberga. You can find him on Twitter at the Golden Muzzy, and he is one half of Leafs Morning Take, Monday to Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Everything you need on the Toronto Maple Leafs, they have you covered. We are streaming live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube channel, and I see there's still a good amount of you buzzing around in the chat right now. If you're new to the channel, do me a solid, hit that subscribe button as well. As we wait and wait and wait, Frank Seravalli looks nice and quiet and cozy up in his Athletic Brewing Insider cam. There was a point like 15 minutes ago where he was laughing very hard, and that led to rampant speculation in the YouTube chat. But Frank, I'm assuming it's quiet right now, right? What's your prediction for this final hour?
Well, let me scroll through my phone and give you an update from what I heard. One GM response, quiet. Another GM response, everyone's already done. Another GM response, talking, but no one's available that's really moving the needle for us. I mean, these are the types of responses that we're getting right now, live and in the moment. You've sort of got the last premier rentals that are available in James Van Riemsdyk and John Klingberg, if you can call them that. And then after that, we're looking at teams. You know, I had a GM just say, what are you after? He said a depth defenseman. I go, well, what does that even mean? Like, are we talking number 8s at this point? The market, it changed so much in the last 5 days that, you know, a lot of what we're looking at, even the guys that we were thinking some bigger transactions, you know, potential wild card deals, doesn't seem like those are materializing at the moment. We've got a few frantic teams, I think, that are sort of right in the mix of trying to make things happen. I think Vancouver is pushing hard at the moment to try and move salary. You know, I think teams like Vegas and Colorado and Seattle and some teams in the West are trying to get their hands on something that might be able to help them. But outside of that, doesn't really seem to be a lot going on.
Lance said in the YouTube chat, Frank, I don't appreciate this honesty. Just please lie to me. And, you could have very easily came on here and been like, Yaremchuk, I'm hearing 12 more deals in the next 45 minutes, at least giving us some hope, right?
I'd love to. Honestly, I've never had a deadline like this, but I've also never had a situation where so many trades happen in the last days leading up to it. You usually have one or three or a couple on a weekend, and there's just nothing new.
All right, Frank, thanks for the insight. We'll send you back up to your Athletic Brewing Insider Cam and go back inside the players' room with Mike McKenna and Jay Rosehill. It's the final hour, boys. Well, at least final hour before the deadline. We're going to go live potentially for an hour post-deadline if there's even any moves to talk about. But I asked Pete Blackburn, I said there have been 6 so far today. Give me your prediction, your dart at the wall kind of take. How many more deals we getting today, Mike? What do you think?
What happens is that you get down at the last hour and people get desperate. And then you start to see even the depth trades coming in. Like your guy who's in the Iron League and the American League that just wants out, and you move them at the last second, for teams that are bulking up for Calder Cup runs in the American League. So I'm going to say that we see at least a dozen come in before this is all said and done. And I think that's it might be a little bit high. I'm trying to nail it. I think it'll be somewhere between like 8 and a dozen. There's got to be somebody out there. Like we just heard from Frank about several of these GMs that it's bit pieces here and there. How could some of these GMs, how can you go back to your owner and not have done anything? That's what it starts to come down to at times, where it's like, they've got to make a move. We got to do something. I'll go 8 to 12. Rosie, do you think that's right? I don't even know, man.
It's hard, man. I always love to see how much engagement do owners have? How much input do they have? How much pressure are the GMs under? Some guys just have free reign, and their owner is in fucking Bora Bora, and he's just like, I don't know, I'm going to look at the bottom line at the end of the year, and they are free reign, and the other guys have their finger on the pulse and are moving things around. But at the end of the day, if you want your guy to make a big deal, there you go. You better be there beforehand. You better be there during the week prior, because we're sitting here going, oh, I hope things hit the fan in the last 3 hours. But why don't we talk about what's already happened? There's been huge splashes happen. I know certain people have touched on it, but people are working. We're breaking news at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not everyone gets to jump into that. There's lots of things that have happened in this trade deadline that we can, I guess, go back to and touch on. Just because things aren't happening in the last hour, there's lots happening. It's a good trade deadline. A good trade deadline doesn't just mean that the whole world comes unfolded in the last 2 hours and everyone has to unpack it. Things have been happening along the way, and I don't see anything major happening. You look at the board, you look at the prospects of big names being moved around 1 through 10. Okay, neat. But the big boys have already been moved, and, you can talk about how they're fitting in, what's happening, what they have coming up ahead of them. And there's lots to talk about. It doesn't have to be Frank Seravalli's gray hair starting to migrate from the sides up into the top of the hair because he's overwhelmed by the league. It can be a nice transition throughout the entire week, and we can talk about that all day long.
Rosie,
Sorry,
what are you doing to keep that coif of yours dark, man? Because look at me. I'm catching up to Frank real fast. You got a beautiful head of hair there, man.
Honestly, it's this light that Frank sent me. Let me just turn it off for a second. Oh, that just makes it dark.
Oh.
I have got some serious grays going on right here. It's full and it's voluptuous, and I just don't wash it. I treat myself like a Native American. I said, have you ever seen a bald Native American? Never in your life. Did they put chemicals and shampoo in their hair? Not one time. So I've been following that since I was about 14. I don't wash my hair. I just rinse it, and I got a full voluptuous head, and my brother is bald as a Cuban.
Wow.
Interesting
stuff.
The one name out there I've been surprised. I thought Matt Dumba was going to move for sure this deadline, whether in advance or today. And I know there's a lot of trepidation. He just seems like the type of player that if there was some retained salary, some team would have been thinking we can get him back to what he was. He would be an interesting enough player that somebody would have gambled upon. But I think he falls into that mid-range contract. Those $5 and $6 million contracts we're finding are really hard to move. Right. If that player doesn't seem to have value that's up to what it may be, Dumba's at $6 million. So, so even at $3 million, is that a guy who slats into your second or third pair? It's still kind of expensive
Hey,
for
Tyler.
a deadline play,
Yeah, what's
Frank's
up, Frank?
breaking.
Yeah, we have some news here, working on the details of the return, but the Minnesota Wild are trading forward Jordan Greenway to the Buffalo Sabres. We were talking about, would the Sabres hop in to the mix and get a player? Jordan Greenway has really struggled this year. We did a player profile on him last weekend. A little bit of a reclamation project, but has size and certainly has some bite and toughness. And there was some skill, certainly the last couple years, that for whatever reason, the point production hasn't been there. He goes to the Buffalo Sabres, and I sort of picked this team as one to watch with Greenway last weekend, because you think about it, as Kyle Okposo is in the last year of his deal, he is a sort of ready-made replacement to fill some of that void. Jordan Greenway has 2 more seasons left on his deal at $3 million. So working on the return details of what is going back from Buffalo to Minnesota, a Minnesota team that is capped out for next season for the most part already after the Matt Boldy contract extension. So moving Jordan Greenway's $3 million is a big deal. The Wild were not going to give him away. So moving Jordan Greenway, that means they definitely got something in return. So we'll apprise you of those details as soon as we have them.
All right, we will stay locked in for that, Frank. Let's get to our pal Nick Alberga for a little instant reaction here. Nick, do you like the take of Greenway going to the Buffalo Sabres and, the perspective of, hey, give that young core at least a sign that we're giving you something here?
Yeah, a little bit of a boost. And I like what Frank said, a reclamation project. If we do recall, with the U.S. development program and BU, like he's had his day in the sunshine for sure. And I think he's a perfect example of a player who could use a change of scenery. Last I checked, a couple of years left on his contract. I think you throw him into the mix there, and Buffalo can play that rough and tumble type game. We talked about JVR earlier on. Like that type of player could help boost Dylan Cousins in the season he's been putting together. So I like this from both sides of the puzzle. It looks like Minnesota might not be done here in terms of wheeling and dealing, but you look at the body of work of a Jordan Greenway, it was time for a change of scenery, and it seems like everything Buffalo's touched the last year has turned to gold. So we'll see how it works out there.
And we're still waiting on the return for that deal as well. But I mean, I know Frank said they're not going to give him away, but I don't think this is a scenario where Buffalo is giving up anything too wild back to Minnesota. Just looking at the picks that the Sabres do have, courtesy of our friends over at Cap Friendly, who are just the best resource to have on a day like today. Buffalo, they have 3 second-rounders this year. They have LA's 3rd this year, and they own every single one of their picks for the next 2 drafts. So that probably gives you a decent idea. Oh, yep. What's up, Frank?
Yeah, so just learning some of these details as they're trickling in here. Part of the package that's going from the Buffalo Sabres to the Minnesota Wild for Jordan Greenway is a 2nd-round pick. We'll see what other details we can learn here.
Okay, 2nd-round pick there. I guess I'll just quickly get your take, Nick, before I go back to the players' room here. Do you like a 2nd-round pick? Does that feel like a good deal for the Sabres to you?
Yeah, I think it's fair value. Obviously, they see potential in the player. Like, there's a lot of teams out there. They look at players and say, hey, what if we took him on? Can we change him? Like, a perfect example is Anthony Beauvillier, right? He goes over to the Vancouver Canucks in the Bo Horvat deal, and I think he's been pretty damn good so far. So I think the hope is there with Buffalo, and I think the currency is fair as well. When you look at, the parallels, he's 26 years of age. He's had his moments where he's had a pretty strong run of games. So I think that's what Buffalo's looking for. Not to mention, it's tough to find players with size and skill the way Greenway can play. So I think they're hoping that obviously it works out with Buffalo, and I think it's a good deal, quite frankly, for both teams here.
All right, there you go. Jordan Greenway going to the Buffalo Sabres from the Minnesota Wild. And Frank reporting a 2nd-round pick. And actually, Michael Russo, who's on top of this stuff for the Wild, says it's a 2023 2nd-round pick and a 2024 5th-round pick. No salary retained, so Mini getting some extra cap space here in the deal. Frank, I'm going to bring you on here for a second, because we do have a special guest joining us on the Daily Faceoff Live Trade Deadline Edition show. 37 minutes until the deadline, and it's been quiet today because a lot of big moves have already happened. The 8, 9, 10 days leading up to the deadline were very busy, and one of those big moves came from the Nashville Predators and the Edmonton Oilers. Mattias Ekholm comes to Edmonton. Tyson Barrie, a part of the package, going back to the Nashville Predators, and he joins us now on the show. Tyson, you got your chance to debut with the Nashville Predators yesterday. What was it like, game one and sort of day one in the Predators organization?
It's been great. Start to, from the time I got traded till, getting out there and getting in a game with the guys yesterday was a good experience. Obviously a bit of a whirlwind and a lot of moving pieces there, but glad I was able to kind of just, fly out the next day and jump into the action with the guys, and, kind of makes it easier to move on.
Tyson, you mentioned the whirlwind that happens with a trade like this. As everyone's gearing up for the deadline, your team in Edmonton was obviously on a path to the playoffs. How much did this catch you by surprise? And, I guess obviously you're with Nashville now, but has the shock worn off yet?
Yeah, it's worn off. I think I was obviously a bit surprised. Yeah, for sure. I didn't. Like I said on a show just not too long ago, I think, there was some traction with Erik Karlsson and San Jose, and I thought maybe, that would happen, and then that kind of cooled off. So maybe I thought I was safe, and then this kind of, got me by surprise a little bit. But, life goes on, you move on, and, I'm excited to be joining the Preds, and Nashville's a beautiful city, great fan base, and a great place to play. So looking forward to it.
So Tyson, take us behind the scenes quickly, when something like this happens and, you said you get on a plane the next day, family back in Edmonton. How does this work? Do they join you in Nashville? What's the plan?
Yeah, they'll be joining me in Nashville, but we're on a 2-week road trip right now. So they're back in Edmonton, packing everything up. And, I'm grateful to my fiance for, she'll be working hard with our son there and getting everything sorted out and organized to come meet down in Nashville.
You have some guys you've played with in the past in Nashville as well, Matt Duchene being one of them. Does that kind of make this a little bit easier when you can at least look to some familiar faces in the room you're heading to?
Yeah, absolutely. I know Dutchy, Yos, I know a little bit, and Sissons I played with in Kelowna. So some familiar faces, and definitely makes the transition easier, and guys you have relationships with and you trust, so you can reach out and ask questions and just get some honest feedback, and it definitely helps make the transition a little smoother.
As you close sort of that one chapter of your career in Edmonton, you think back to when you joined the Oilers. It was that 1-year deal, and you came in, got another contract, were part of one of the best power plays, or the best power play in the NHL. Have you had a chance to maybe look back, and do you look back on that time in Edmonton fondly?
Yeah, I think I will for sure. It's only been 48 hours, so I'm not looking back yet. But I'm sure down the road when I look back on my career and everything, I'll be very grateful for the time I got to spend in Edmonton, and the city was great to me. The fans are great to me, and got to meet a lot of good friends there and play with a lot of great players. And obviously, they're like you mentioned, they're on a path for the playoffs, and they're looking to do some damage. So I'm cheering for those guys. But now I'm here in Nashville, and we're in the hunt ourselves. So, just focusing on that now.
Some big hockey coming down the stretch for the Nashville Predators. Tyson, I know it's been a bit of a whirlwind couple of days for you, so appreciate you giving us a few minutes today. Thanks.
No worries. Thanks for having me, guys.
There you go. Newest defenseman on the Nashville Predators. That was Tyson Barrie. And Frank, a chance to chat with a player like that. I'll let you get back to the insider thing in a second, but really puts, again, the human element of all of this into perspective, right?
Yeah, and I think this was a giant shock in many ways. He kind of touched on it a little bit, but the power play is clicking, your team is clicking, and the last thing you're thinking at this point is, I'm going to be the guy that ends up being on the move. There's so many trades that happen in the deadline period for contending teams where you don't pluck a piece off your roster. And so with that, I think there's, significant risk for the Edmonton Oilers. And I've talked about this and addressed it in the last few days, that when you add someone like Mattias Ekholm and sub him out for Tyson Barrie, it's a huge stylistic change. And I think, some would argue, is this what the Oilers needed? Some would say, yes, this is a perfect stylistic fit. Someone that has some size and defends maybe a little bit better. But the power play, as you mentioned, 31% all season long, it's been lethal. It's been game changing. And so when you make that change, not to mention the other part of it and the chemistry that comes with that as well, Tyson Barrie, an incredibly well-liked guy in that Edmonton locker room, that I'm sure that's hard to say goodbye and move on and make that change. So, I think certainly caught a lot of people off guard that if there was going to be a defenseman moving or if money needed to move, that Tyson Barrie would end up being that guy. And just a crazy turn of events, I think, in Edmonton this week.
Frank, we'll let you get back to your Athletic Brewing insider cam here because there's just over 30 minutes to go until the NHL trade deadline. We have a deal in Jordan Greenway going from the Wild to the Sabres, a few other things maybe trickling down. We'll get back to our players' room with McKenna and Rosehill, but first let's check back in with our pal, Pete Blackburn. Let's go to Pete Blackburn. I want to check in with Pete one more time before the deadline hits. Pete, you just saw we had Tyson Barrie on. We're talking about the human element of it. What did you think of that deal from a hockey perspective, though? Do you like that move from Edmonton, or do you think the price was a bit too rich?
No, I like the deal for Edmonton. I think it gives them a different look, and I think that it suits kind of what they need. I know that Barrie was liked in that locker room, and I know that he's a talented offensive player. But when you look at what Edmonton has, they need a little bit more defensive responsibility, and I think that the priority needed to shift that way. And I think Ekholm is a good two-way guy, and he moves the puck well, so you don't lose a ton in terms of puck movement. So I like the fit. Do I think that it fixes all their problems? No, I still think that they have some defensive issues that they're going to need to soothe out, especially when you head towards the vision of a long-term playoff run, because defense is important. We've seen, a Florida Panthers team last year that just tried to outscore all its problems. That doesn't work in the playoffs. So, I think this gets them closer, but it's not a solve all.
Yeah. Fair enough. And 30 minutes to go. Reports from earlier today indicate that the Oilers are likely done for the day. A lot of teams that probably are done for the day, but still some pretty big names. Pete, we'll check back in with you once the deadline hits in another 30 minutes. Let's go back to our players' room with Mike McKenna and Jay Rosehill. Tyson Barrie hopping on. I mean, you guys, again, have been in locker rooms around deadline time as well. As you heard Barrie kind of talk about having to leave Edmonton and the surprise, the way it kind of hit him. I mean, he even touched on hearing the Erik Karlsson rumors and being aware that, oh man, that was going on and maybe I would have been a piece of that. Jay, do you kind of feel for a guy like that who gets sort of blindsided with a deal this close to the deadline?
Yeah, for sure. But you talked about him say, he saw some deals go through, thought he might be going here or there. And when that gets filled up, he thinks he might be safe. And it's always funny hanging out. Like, I haven't really been on that trade block in that sense where, there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of speculation about what's going to happen. But I've been near guys that have been, and they're watching and day to day. What have you heard? What have you heard? And the families talking and how invested are his kids in their school and their wives are plugged in with this charity and all these things where it's like, are we moving or aren't we moving? And then if, where they think they might be slotted gets filled up, all of a sudden they breathe a sigh of relief. And then, as in this case, get blindsided by something else. But at the end of the day, that's the life of a pro hockey player and a pro hockey player's family. I know he's going to say all his things as he's packing up and leaving Edmonton, but to get to Nashville, Vegas, let's be honest, a guy of his caliber, we're getting no state tax, we're warmer weather, we're out of the scrutiny and everything that is the Edmonton Oilers, as I know you're very, very aware of, Mr. Yaremchuk. Mm-hmm. The problems and trials and tribulations of that. I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be a good move for him, someone that wants him to fill a role that maybe is more reasonable than what the Oilers expected of him. And at the end of the day, he's going to make that move. He's going to make that transition. And, people are going to realize that he's left, a hole in, say, the first line power play, which obviously is centered around McDavid and Draisaitl. But he was up on the top of that quarterback of that umbrella, and he's moving things around. And he left a little hole there. And I think that's what people are kind of a little bit worried about in Edmonton, saying, how do we fill that? And all the little mechanics that come with a trade like that. It's interesting to get his take and his thing as honest as the players can be this day and age with all the clips and takes that are made. You can tell that it's something he didn't expect, but something that I think he's going to accept full-heartedly coming forward.
Hey, guys.
Hey, what's up, Frank?
Let's hear it,
Just
Frank.
A quick update on the full details of the Jordan Greenway trade. Michael Russo from The Athletic with the details: a 2023 second round pick and a 2024 fifth round pick for Greenway. As mentioned, a bit of a reclamation project, but Greenway going to the Buffalo Sabres. And one more smaller trade that is Oscar Sundquist is going from the Detroit Red Wings to the Minnesota Wild per Shayna Goldman of The Athletic. She's been all over it this week.
Yeah, Shayna, and I love she's done the Gossip Girl thing on Twitter, too. She's been breaking news and been wildly entertaining with it as well. So there's a couple of quick moves. We'll go back to McKenna and Rosehill here. Mike, your thoughts on that Jordan Greenway deal? What do you make of him going to Buffalo?
Well, Greenway is a really physical presence. And for me, this point totals this year in Minnesota have been symptomatic of what that team's done in general. It just hasn't worked this season. You know, when you think about Greenway lining up alongside Foligno and the heaviness that team would play with, especially carrying it into playoffs a couple of years ago when I covered the Vegas Golden Knights closely, that was the first thing you thought about, was how much momentum they could generate. That's something that's been missing out of Buffalo's lineup. I like this play from Buffalo's standpoint, that they're getting a player that could fill that space for them, that could give them some toughness and grit and, you know, chuck in goals here and there, but Greenway's actually more so of a hardworking playmaker. You know, he's a half a point a game guy that brings the physicality. A second round pick and a fifth seems, I mean, that's pretty good return if you ask me for Minnesota. I'm surprised by the second, but Buffalo had a glut of those, so maybe that part's not too surprising. And the coolest part here is that I'm not sure if Alex, our producer here, has
we got him.
Received an email just recently. So check this out, everybody. You may recognize that guy on the right. The person that's in the white jersey, that one's easy to notice, but the one in the heavy jacket there, that's Jordan Greenway, probably like 9 or 10 years old. That's myself at St. Lawrence University. Jordan Greenway from Canton, New York. He was a Golden Bear before going off to Boston University in the U.S. Development Program, being a U.S. Olympian. And then years later, when he made the NHL, I was with the Dallas Stars. 2018, there we are. So he grew up. I got uglier, but it was pretty unbelievable because I didn't know that picture existed of us together until somebody from Canton, New York, where St. Lawrence University is, sent that to me. Really cool stuff. So I hope he does well, man. I've been rooting for him his whole career. I think he brings an element to Buffalo that they're really going to like and can maybe continue to keep him in that place. I think he's much better than he's shown this year, at least I think point-wise, Rosie, I think Greenway's got more to give than just 7 points in 45 games. I think he's more so of a 30-point guy in the NHL.
Yeah, that's wicked. A guy that's half a point a game who can average that and bring that to the table and maybe blossom into more, who brings a physical presence and has a big body and big body next to you. Obviously, that kid grew up a little bit there, but I always love seeing that stuff. I mean, 10 years from the age of 9 to 19, it's just, I don't think a human being changes anymore in that. And I always love seeing the pictures of kids who are superstars now or whatever the case may be, when, 10 short years ago, the player you're talking about taking a picture with some kid is just the average picture, and they grow up to become whatever they become in sports world. It's always awesome to see. And that's no better example of that than you right there.
Let me just cut in there real quick. I don't know if you saw it, Rosie, this week, but Cal Foote goes to the Nashville Predators. And who's he on a team with? Matt Duchene, who Duchene lived with the Foote family in Colorado when he was a member of the Avalanche, and Cal was like 10 years old. Now they're teammates, man. Like, kind of mind-blowing stuff, but it's cool. Like, same thing with me and Brady Tkachuk. Like, the Tkachuk brothers used to come shoot at hockey camps I ran as they were 14 and 15 years old. And I still remember, getting a text from Matthew Tkachuk saying, "Mr. McKenna, I'm very sorry I can't make it and shoot today." And here they are now. Brady's first year pro with the Senators. We're teammates. My last win in the NHL, the first guy to hug me at the end of the game is Brady. It just, you can't make shit like that up, dude. Like, that's the one really cool aspect that you get sometimes. And I just, it's really fun to look back on those moments. I hold them really dear.
Absolutely.
We are waiting for some more news to drop as we are just under 23 minutes away from the NHL trade deadline. But let's wrap up the conversation on Jordan Greenway by heading out to our pal Matt Larkin for Larkin's trade grades. Again, if you missed the deal, Jordan Greenway going to the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres giving up a 2023 second rounder and a 2024 fourth rounder. No money retained in this deal either. Mr. Larkin, what do you think on either side of this one?
Well, as an aside, that graphic, by the way, it is to scale. That is how big my head is relative to my body, Tyler. And I like this deal a lot for both teams. I think it just makes a ton of sense. So if you're Kevin Adams and the Buffalo Sabres, you're 4 points out of a playoff spot. You've got 4 games in hand on the New York Islanders. You've lost Alex Tuch. You have 3 second-round picks. You can toss those around like candy and send a message to your guys. This team has improved so much this year under Don Granato. I love the message that's being sent to the troops with this trade. Buffalo could afford it. You're bringing in someone that's a big body, like Mike, of course, said. Jordan Greenway, 6'6". He's not the most consistent player, but he does bring that heavy presence, someone that can answer the bell if necessary. I like it for the Sabres when it's time for some trench warfare, especially when they're fully healthy. Maybe you can have Jordan Greenway down on the third line. So to me, that's a pretty luxurious third liner just based on his upside. And from the Wild's perspective, I like it as well. You're getting away from a couple more years at $3 million for a player who is underachieved, maybe needs a change of scenery. You've got the buyout penalty for, of course, Ryan Suter and Zach Parise jumping to $14.7 million next year. You need all the help you can get to escape that under the cap, or at least make a little bit of breathing room. So I like it for both. It's an A- for the Minnesota Wild. It's a B+ for the Buffalo Sabres.
Okay, so a little bit of a win-win here in this one for Matt Larkin, who I thought may be a little bit busier with us today, but that was only our 7th deal of significance so far in here on deadline day. So we will continue to keep our eyes on what's going on, and we'll continue to just look up at the top of the screen and see what exactly Frank Seravalli is doing in the Athletic Brewing Insider.
I'm working on details. I see the reports. James Van Riemsdyk going from the Philadelphia Flyers to the Detroit Red Wings. I don't have confirmation yet. No reason to doubt the news from Elliot Friedman and others if they've piled on, but no confirmation on my end just yet.
All right, so there he goes. No confirmation, but some rumors flying that it could be James Van Riemsdyk going to the Detroit Red Wings. You know what? Let's go to Nick Alberga quickly before we head back to the players' room. Let's get some instant reaction on, again, we don't know the deal yet, Nick, but JVR potentially going to the Wings. I had talked earlier in the show, the Wings said they have a lot of picks. 2 in the first round this year, 2 in the first round next year, 3 second rounders this year as well. Also own their own third rounder in each of the next 2 drafts. I think it makes sense to, hey, you're a young team that you want to play some meaningful hockey. Go get a piece that you can just even trial run for a couple of months, and they have the future assets to make it work. What do you think of JVR potentially to the Wings?
Yeah, maybe it's Stevie Y apologizing to Dylan Larkin, who was rather emotional yesterday when talking about Tyler Bertuzzi, getting traded to the Boston Bruins. So essentially, it's a replacement. I think obviously a guy like Dominik Kubalik is better served in that bottom 6. I know he's had his moments this year, but this could actually be a boost if you play fantasy hockey when it comes to James Van Riemsdyk, what he can potentially bring to a line with Larkin and David Perron there in the top 6. But it's a curious move. I know Detroit was on a hot streak, but they've been ripped to shreds this past week, the ultimate 5-game slate, and it hasn't gone according to plan for this team. And I know Husso's banged up right now, but yeah, to your point, we've talked about that a lot over the last 3 hours, is maybe giving your team a bit of a boost and having them play some meaningful games down the stretch. We'll see if that continues, and you never know with Steve Yzerman. Maybe he looks at a guy like Van Riemsdyk as a long-term plan there too.
Yeah, fair enough. We'll wait to see what the official return is on this one before slapping a trade grade on it. Thanks for hopping on quickly, Nick Alberga. Let's go back to the players' room with Jay Rosehill and Mike McKenna. And I saw Jay Rosehill crushing a sandwich a couple minutes ago in between his hits. We have food dropped off at the office, and I'm starting to smell it here now. It's driving me crazy. But with 18 minutes till the deadline, there's no time to focus on anything but the trades. Mike McKenna, what do you think? JVR to the Wings.
I think Nick nailed it, that it's a curious move. I didn't take the Wings as a team that I thought was really going to make rental deals at this deadline. And, Sundqvist is a player that I really like. So they've lost Bertuzzi recently. They've lost a grit element there, probably some some scoring that comes with it with him. But I'm just trying to process this one, I guess. How close are the Red Wings truly to being able to make the Stanley Cup playoffs this year? I don't see them being there. I can only think of this as a play to try to get ahead of the field and maybe keep JVR around to the future, but it's not going to be at $7 million again. Like Rosie, what do you think on this? I'm a little bit, I love the player. I'm just surprised by the location. That's all.
Yeah, I didn't see it. I thought the Red Wings were kind of sellers, and they're kind of moving guys along and thinking long term and kind of staying out of the mix and looking at their future, which is kind of off the grid of what we're doing right now. And then all of a sudden our number one guy moves to them, and you got to ask, for what purpose is that? Is this for tenure? Do you think you're going to get him long term? Do you think you're going to get him cheap? Are you going to make him happy there in the next month or two and see if he signs long term? I don't really understand it. And I don't claim to be the number one man in this space, but just that's not what I saw happening here. And, we got 16 and a half minutes left. Maybe they flip them. That would be unbelievable. And Frank can start going fucking haywire on that phone. That would be my favorite.
Hey guys, just quickly here.
Here we go.
Just some details. Nothing is done between the Flyers and Detroit Red Wings, I'm told. They have spoken. The Red Wings certainly are interested in the player. But right at this exact moment in time, is it possible that it gets pulled off before 3 p.m.? Yes, it is. But right now, and Darren Dreger adding some more context, that the Red Wings are trying to move another player first. So a couple zingers right to my text message inbox. Nothing is done, in quotes. So let's hang on to our hats here.
I will sit in silence until we find out whether or not James Van Riemsdyk is a member of the Detroit Red Wings. I'm glued to the Twitter right now, Frank. I'll be watching you closely up in the Athletic Brewing Insider Cam. So maybe no deal, or I shouldn't say maybe, there is no deal quite yet. Only the drama you can get in the final 15 minutes ahead of the NHL trade deadline. Of course, there are always deals that trickle in right towards the end or after the deadline as well. So we'll be staying live with you for an hour post-deadline as well. So keep it locked on the Daily Faceoff YouTube channel. I see we are at our high for viewers so far today. Why not hit that subscribe button while you're here? I did say someone would shotgun an Athletic Brewing beer if we hit the 5K. We're not quite there yet. We're only at 4,500. So if you're watching, hit that subscribe button as well. Let's circle back to our players' room with Rosie and McKenna here, as there is some drama between the Red Wings and the Flyers.
If we hit 7,500, I'm just going to throw this out there. If we hit 7,500, I will shotgun a warm Athletic Brew at 4 o'clock.
Okay.
How about that?
There are 2,200 people watching on the YouTube right now. I can see in the analytics that under 50% of you are subscribed. I'm just saying you can make that gap to 7,500 relatively quickly here for us, and I would very much like to see what Frank Seravalli is throwing out for this one. So yes, we are gonna keep it locked on that subscriber count as well, not just what's going on the trade market. Let's go back to Rosie and McKenna in this one. The drama, boys. This is what we live for. Under 15 minutes to go until the deadline. JVR, and not quite a Detroit Red Wing. He's number one on the list. John Klingberg at number 2. I'm surprised it's still quiet on Klingberg. I just have a hard time believing, guys, that the Ducks are going to keep this guy. It just feels like one of those things where you get whatever you can for him.
They're not going to get anything more, are they, Rosie? Like, you can't hang on to Klingberg. Like, even if at this stage you get a 6th or 7th round pick.
Yeah, like 13 minutes to go. You might as well hold on and see if you can convince them to re-sign, or I don't know what they're doing, but 13 minutes left. I just don't understand what the value is of coming down to the wire. The only thing it gets for sellers, people are like, I want to wait for the best deal possible. It gets down to the nitty gritty like this, and everyone who's going to give you any option, they're going to go, you're desperate. You have nothing. You're sitting there with your horn in your hand. Here's a 7th rounder. Exactly. Do you want to unload him or not? Or you lose him for absolutely nothing on July 1st. So that shit happens too. But going back to Frank shotgunning a beer, if we get, my fingers are busy creating burner accounts right now, because that would be a forever GIF at the trade deadline. Frankazoid shotgunning beers every time a deal went down. I would be mashing that GIF button on Twitter or whatever it is. I can't wait. Let's go, people. We can do
Could
this.
you imagine them? Can you imagine them in like the old, like, you know, wife beater doing it, just an undershirt? That would make it even better. That would really put it over the top. But how, like, speaking of that, how many, for all the teams that aren't playing tonight, Rosie, and the players that have been on the line, how many beers deep are they right now? Like, you're seriously sitting there having lunch beers just waiting for the news to come down at this point. Like, I'd seen that before on trade deadline where guys are just like, fuck it, man. Like, whatever happens, we're going to the bar. Like, this is one of those days where I've seen it happen before.
Well, it's usually like a Monday or something, though. And I mean, no one's got to play tomorrow and no one gives a shit. And it's like no one's at the bar and people are working and doing their week. And you can just go under the radar to some hole in the wall and start ripping piss missiles with your teammates because you're happy you stuck around or whatever the case is. This is Friday. This is good for us right now. I mean, I'm 3 or 4 deep right now. I got things going on tonight. I'm jacked right now. But for the players, they got to think about Saturday night still, right? That sucks for them.
Oh man, things continuing, by the way, to be in a bit of a holding pattern when it comes to JVR, and we had heard maybe it was going to be the Detroit Red Wings. Frank saying no deal in place, so the number one name on our trade targets board. It is a dramatic finish to our trade deadline show. 11:30 to go, as you can see by the timer up top. Mike, here, let me, like, again, we're speculating right now. That's all we really can do at this point on the show. If it's not Detroit, is there another team out there that you look at and go, they make sense for JVR?
It's Winnipeg, man. I really thought that. And even, you know, if Vegas is just going to spend all the money they possibly can, why wouldn't they go for it if they're trying to get help? That power play sucks in Vegas. Like, it's terrible. And their power play actually got, like, when Mark Stone went away on the power play and the power play started to go completely through Eichel, it got worse. It's no other way around it. So, you know, if they don't have any to play with, I mean, but I think Winnipeg makes a lot of sense for that team, for JVR. But if this is it, if it's already being like thrown around that Detroit's the team, maybe that means that nobody else is actually in on them. I don't know, man.
I honestly think with the East being powerhouses and with the teams being put together, usually you have 2 or 3 teams spread out through the league who's like, oh yeah, they could make a run. You know, who are we going to see in the finals? And this is just odd to me where, like, you know, that those 2 divisions in the East are just so hot and heavy. People are like, why would I risk anything to get a rental to do what? Maybe get to the first round of the playoffs. I know we talked about that being good for the younger guys and getting experience and stuff like that, but not everyone thinks that way. And to grab a guy like that just to lose him for essentially nothing and to give something away for him to do nothing with it, like, it just doesn't make sense to people, I think.
Well, what about a team like Seattle that's really pushing here, man? Like,
yeah.
Like, this is a team that seems like they've just kind of been sniffing around the perimeter, just waiting in the weeds to make a good play, honestly, for me. Like, I think Ron Francis has his finger on the pulse enough to know that his team is good enough for playoffs. Maybe the Cup's not on the radar this year, but you want to give yourself a chance to really compete and go far. Kind of like we were talking about with Buffalo earlier, right? You're setting the table here. Boy, JVR looked good there, wouldn't he?
I mean, there's 9 minutes left. If you want that guy, why haven't you gone and got him? There's 9 minutes left. What are we doing? We already put a false check mark up beside him, and now we had to renege on it. So it looks like this guy may stay
for the same reason we were talking about Klingberg. Get anything you can out of him, right? Like, it may be that point for the Flyers. And if you're looking at Seattle, like, to me, they're about, I mean, they're deep, but they're, where would he slot? I mean, is Tolvanen? Tolvanen's done a good job. Tyler, he was your guy, man. You were all over that waiver wire claim.
I like
grabbing Tolvanen. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But boy, JVR would make that club pretty good. And would they move somebody out? I don't know. There's been talk of that too, that Seattle could go either direction, that they could actually move players and bring people in. So maybe they're just kind of like waiting out to see what happens and make kind of their first big splash in their first couple of years.
I'm just waiting for Frank to get that big text and crush a beer across his head and absolutely shoddy it with his tarp ripped off. But time's ticking.
And remember, we may not hear about these deals until 15 or 20 minutes after. The one time I got traded, I found out 40 minutes after trade deadline, man. I thought I was
and so just to give you guys some details on when something like this does come down to the wire, which from the people that I'm talking to right now, it very well may be. There's the GM on the phone, and then a seat or two over is the assistant GM that is frantically has like 3 or 4 emails ready to go to send to NHL Central Registry. The deal must be registered by 2:59 p.m. It must be sent in with all of the details of the trade. It can't just be, we're trading James Van Riemsdyk to X. It needs to be, we're trading him to this team for this, this, and this. And then the other team has to send the same thing, and they have to be in by that time-stamped period, or else the deal does not count. That's why when you see some of these things linger into the 3 o'clock hour, because the trade call has not begun, it's because the details just came in at the very last second. So there are some scrambly fingers right now in Philadelphia, probably at their practice facility in Voorhees, New Jersey, trying to figure out exactly where James Van Riemsdyk is going. The same exact situation is playing itself out right now in Anaheim with John Klingberg as well. So stay tuned. 6 minutes and 45 seconds, and we are counting down.
Frank, you get those eyes back on that cell phone. We're gonna park the main panel for a second. We're gonna take the final few minutes. We're gonna actually extend this panel, bring Nick Alberga into the mix. But first, I want to check in one more time before the deadline with Pete Blackburn. Pete, I know you got a take on this whole JVR going to the Wings, not going to the Wings. I mean, I liked your tweet. Is Stevie Y just throwing a quick heat check out there? Seeing a little stutter? Oh, you might be muted, Pete.
Sorry, I forgot I was eating a sub and I didn't want everybody to have to hear me chewing inside the microphone. No, yeah, I think it's a situation where it could be, just a quick heat check to see what the general public thinks and lets him get away with. Because I don't know, JVR to the Wings makes no sense to me whatsoever. So not surprising. I mean, I guess it looked like they had a deal and then something happened, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, they sold off a lot. They have a lot of picks. I get making a push for the playoffs. We'll see if anything comes to fruition there. JVR, Klingberg, the two big rentals that we're watching the closest on our trade targets board here. 5 minutes to go, and there has still not been a lot going on today. If anything, Sorry, Frank.
This is what we wanted. This is the suspense. This is the last 5 minutes of, like, legitimately, I'm getting messages from people saying, we're trying. Like, this is what's happening right down to the wire. And they may not be the biggest names, but stuff still happens.
Okay, as we hit the 5 minute mark, I mean, Pete, the fact that Frank's hopping on here being like, oh, teams are now texting in saying they're trying. Were they aware this has been we've been doing shows, a bunch of networks have been doing shows all morning, all afternoon. They could have gotten to work, I don't know, earlier this morning instead of waiting till the 5 minute mark. Also feels very NHL, though, to be sitting there and being like, 5 minutes to go. Maybe we do need another ad, Pete?
To be mad, right? Because we've seen what's happened this entire week. We got an entire week of entertainment rather than one final day. So, I think that it's hard to be disappointed. We've been able to talk about this for a week plus, and to the point where it was so crazy in that week plus that we were all expecting to be underwhelmed today. So I'm not shocked. I've had a good time here, shooting the shit and eating my sub, and no complaints from me whatsoever, even though kind of limping across the finish line here.
We're going to get there, though. What do we got in that sub? Give us the details while we wait for trade details.
It's gone now. I've had plenty of time to get into it, but it was a nice little Italian sub, and I'm quite satisfied.
All right, well, we will let you sit in your satisfaction, and we'll come back to you, check in one more time before the end of our show today. We've made a trade ourselves. Nick Alberga is being acquired by the Players Room. Some would question the fit of a guy like Nick Alberga in a segment called the Players Room, but we're going to shoehorn him in here as we come down to the end. 3 minutes and 30 seconds to go until the deadline. Mr. Alberga, you're flashing that shirt. You want someone to make a deal. Give me your quick take. Who do you think? Who's the GM who's got an itchy trigger finger with minutes to go?
No, I'm trying to make fucking money to get away from this fucking show because this has been so boring. No, I'm kidding. You guys have been killing it. That's the question, right? The Vegas Golden Knights, are they in the conversation? The Seattle Kraken, is Anaheim going to do anything? I guess Philadelphia is doing nothing. Like, you want to talk about head scratchers, and we have an hour still to do that. Philadelphia, number one. The Vancouver Canucks, I think, a close second as to what they're currently doing in the executive board. Like, are they playing a game on PlayStation? Like, it's utterly ridiculous to me. But I think what's happened, we can't be disappointed, as Pete said. I mean, so much has transpired here. We even got Jay Rosehill to talk about iPods. So it's a win all around.
Fair enough.
Nick, I'm not sure what you're doing in this segment. This is a players only segment, but I do have to wonder if you're a GM right now and you're mashing your email buttons, trying to pull your hair out to get a deal done. And you know how, as Frank said, you got to put everything on paper, send it into the league. Then the other team's got to verify, and there's 7 minutes left. You're a fucking moron if you left it to that. You've had weeks and weeks and weeks. There is no deadline. The only deadline is this is the last second you have to do anything. You have months and months and months. There's not a 10-minute window to make trades. It's not like this is the fucking Hunger Games or whatever. Like, what are you doing? I have no idea why a guy would be missing out on an opportunity because he couldn't get his goddamn fax machine to work in the last 4 minutes of the deadline. That's absolutely ridiculous. But if that is the case, I want a live feed on all the war rooms throughout the league. Put it on Netflix. I think it would blow all the other shows out of the water if these guys are actually that stupid to leave it to the last 5 minutes to try to make their team better.
I'm on the horn of finding you co-host for my show.
Frank.
Buddy.
No, I thought it was Frank. It was Nick.
We're co-hosts.
How many things do we leave to the last minute in life, though? That's just how it works. Like,
reminds me of my kids. Like, are these GM children? Is it my 8-year-old kid getting his shit done at night, and he waits till he's almost in bed to tell me that he wanted to do something? Let's smarten up, GMs. This is the show.
Yeah. Well, how many GMs are down on modern communication, man? I don't think they're doing these. If they were doing these deals through Insta or Snap, they'd be done like this. But they're not down on those apps, boys.
Last minute to go. Last minute to go here until the deadline. I think it's more or less a lock. Like, we see guys in our top 10, the Parekos and the Kevin Hayes and even Brock Besser. Okay, the guys with term, I would put the percentage that we're going to get a deal for one of them pretty low because those feel like more complicated trades. I'm really interested, guys, as we get to the final 30 seconds here, just how many deals will trickle in under the wire, because a lot of guys who don't have control after this year, guys who are maybe just fourth line, extra pieces, someone who can be your 8th D-man. I wonder how many more will just quickly kind of come down the pipeline here as we see Frank Seravalli glued to his phone on the Athletic Brewing Insider Cam. We hit the 10-second mark, and as we come down to the end of, as Pete Blackburn put it, just crawling our way to the finish line of this trade deadline, the horn goes. We are now past the NHL trade deadline, which I think means I'm now allowed to. Am I? Do I? I get an ice cold Athletic Brewing from our friends to enjoy over the last hour. That foamed like crazy. But gentlemen, pencils down. The deadline has hit. We'll see how many moves we get after the fact here, guys. But we'll see. I mean, let me just throw an open-ended question your way. Again, deals can happen. I am fully understanding that.
Beer. Let's go.
Yeah.
Drink the
Nick,
beer,
I'll start with you.
Chuck.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, drink the beer.
There you go. I'll flip
that
this
is good,
over.
and that is refreshing.
There you go. Everybody's
shout out to our friends at Athletic Brewing for this one. Nick, I'll start with you. Which GM are you, or which fan base should be the most disappointed in their GM's lack of activity?
Ooh, I would say the Anaheim Ducks. You're a definitive seller. You want to get Connor Bedard, and you really couldn't move any of your assets or guys you thought were your assets or players with a year left on their contract. I was expecting way more from the Anaheim Ducks. Having said that, as you know, deals can still trickle in here.
Mm-hmm. Rosie, your thoughts?
Yeah, same thing. I think come July 1, if you see anybody that waited till the 11th hour here to get something done and ultimately didn't get it done, and they're going to lose some big name guys for absolutely nothing, and you're not involved in the sweepstakes for Bedard, and you're starting, fresh from scratch, losing a premier player. It's kind of unacceptable. And if they're sitting there mashing the send button on the facsimile with 5 minutes left, that's just poor management, in my opinion.
Mike, your thoughts on which GM should be?
Oh? I don't know how Vancouver can live with themselves right now. Like, if you're trying to create cap space without creating cap space by taking on $10 million in wingers and everything. Like there's no clear plan there. The verbiage doesn't match the action. And they're going to be stuck being mediocre forever. So I'd be mad if I was a Vancouver fan that either move people out or figure out what the game plan is, because this whole last year has been a mess there. And I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah. Just taking a peek. I'll give my take on this as we wait for Frank to potentially give us some moves coming down the pipe. To me, it's the Carolina Hurricanes. And if they don't get anything done in this final little window, like you go get Jesse Puljujarvi, a guy who could, quite frankly, barely stay in the lineup for the Edmonton Oilers. He was getting healthy, scratched at different points. And I get you like that lottery ticket, but that's not a team. Oh, what's up, Frank?
Sources say James Van Riemsdyk not traded prior to the NHL's 3 p.m. trade deadline.
Wow. So there you go. We thought there may have been a deal in place earlier. Turns out that's not the case. That is mind-blowing to me that a team like the Flyers, so far out of the race, could not get anything for an asset like that. JVR at number 1 on our trade targets board. Frank Seravalli saying he will not be traded. He was not traded before the deadline. I'll flip the order on this one and start with you, Mike McKenna. Scale of 1 to 10. What's the oof size on the Flyers not getting anything for JVR?
I think it's pretty big. I mean, they need help there in Philly. And if JVR is going to be gone at the end of the season, you had to be something available, especially considering he's a valuable player, man. Like net front presence. How many times do we hear that phrase? He's one of the best in the league. There's plenty of teams that could use help on the power play with it. I understand his contract was probably odorous in some ways, but I think that had to go. I mean, if Kevin Hayes, think of the friction between Hayes and Tortorella, like at points this year. I think that Chuck Fletcher really needed to move a decent amount of people out of Philly to make that thing go, and there hasn't been enough of it in my eyes. So if Zach McEwen is he's the consolation prize to James Van Riemsdyk, and you're getting Lemieux in return, that's a little tough one to have go over amongst the fan base, I think.
Rosie?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in Philadelphia, man, I thought years ago when John Tortorella left Vancouver, that was without a doubt, I would have put a healthy bet on it that he would never coach in the NHL again. He's too old school. He's too ornery. He's too opinionated. He's just too strong of a personality to handle these new age, not even millennials anymore. You got Gen Z kids coming up through the league, especially these days where they're getting younger and younger. For him to even, apply his coaching strategy to these guys without there being so much friction. And as much as his pre-season speech that came out where he's jacking those guys up fucking got me fired up and I wanted to go through a wall for him, it hasn't worked out. And these guys are not responding to him. Guys want to bail. JVR probably wanted out. Hayes has got friction with him, and now it's you're sitting there holding the cup. And I don't know if they're going anywhere positive right now with Torts being their coach. I have nothing against him. I see the writing on the wall where, you put him in there and things just don't line up the way they would with like a John Cooper or anything. There's more problems than there are solutions, it looks like.
Nick Alberga, the big news coming from the deadline period coming to an end is that JVR did not move. Do you see any silver lining in this for the Flyers, or should they have really just tried to take whatever they could get?
No, it's a shit show. Let's not sugarcoat this. I love Chuck Fletcher, but things didn't go according to plan in Minnesota. They're certainly not going that way here now with the Philadelphia Flyers. At the time, I wondered about the Tortorella hire. Then you bring in D'Angelo. Kevin Hayes is an absolute stud. Everybody loves the guy, and he wants out. Sanheim, they signed into a contract a week later, like a massive extension. A week later, the guy's a healthy scratch. So I think it comes from the top down. Like they're an absolute shit show right now. And the fact that James Van Riemsdyk's actually having a pretty good season, they waited probably too long. The market outplayed them, and they gave up nothing or got nothing but James Van Riemsdyk and some of their rental guys. I think they traded Patrick Brown, but I expected way more of the Philadelphia Flyers. And I do think this team is doomed for X amount of years. There's a lot of heavy lifting, and I'm just not sure Chuck Fletcher could be that guy to do it.
Again, the deadline has hit, but some deals could still trickle down over the next little bit. So keep it locked on the Daily Faceoff YouTube for the Daily Faceoff Live trade deadline edition as we come down the stretch. Yes, a lot of reports going around that the Flyers did trade Patrick Brown to the Sens for a 2023 6th-round pick. And the other deal they made today was Zach McEwen going for Brendan Lemieux and a pick. A lot of things trickling in about which teams are done for the day. But again, you never know how things could slide through in the next sort of 10 to 15 minutes here. So we'll continue to break it all down. John Klingberg is the kind of next man up now that we know JVR is not going anywhere. Frank Seravalli breaking that news a couple of minutes ago. It's Klingberg watch now. Did the Ducks find a way to get their $7 million D-man off the books before the end of the day? We'll be keeping it locked on that. Coming back to the panel here, I suppose. I don't want to do the whole declaring a winner thing, but is there one move, Nick Alberga, that you look at and go, hey, that one is kind of my favorite. I like that one specific piece of work the most.
All right, so it's tough for me to say this because Rosie and I cover the Toronto Maple Leafs, but the Boston Bruins, like you talked to me a month ago, they were far and above the best team in the NHL. Oh yeah, and now you add Tyler Bertuzzi to that roster. I know Hall's banged up. I know Foligno's banged up, but Bertuzzi brings that sandpaper. The Leafs have coveted that player for a long period of time. They couldn't get him. Then they get Orlov. Dmitry Orlov's been outstanding. You pair him with Charlie McAvoy on that back end. I think that's really, really scary. And then on top of that, the sandpaper that a Garnet Hathaway brings to the table. I cannot believe what the Boston Bruins have done and sort of adding and tinkering a bit to that roster. You know, getting rid of a guy like Craig Smith, Shane Bowers on that list as well, and going pretty much all in. It's got that last dance feel to it, and I think Boston just got stronger, and it's going to be tough, I think, for any team to beat them this season.
Fair enough. Rosie, what's one deal you like?
I like what the New York Rangers have done on paper. I mean, if you look at it from a speculative range where you're looking at who they added and how good of players they are, they look fantastic. Whether that will come to fruition in the playoffs and going forward, I don't know. But again, biased like Nick, to look at the Toronto Maple Leafs, they have added some key pieces, especially, I like the Ryan O'Reilly and the Luke Shen moves. I feel like this team has highlighted areas in their game that have been lacking and fans have been crying to be addressed for years and years, and they did it all in 1 week. And now is a matter of just putting rubber on the road and getting it done. And I feel like they have actually rounded out their team from a depth perspective as good as anybody. And there's so many good teams in that East, especially. It's just going to be fun to see what happens in the playoffs here.
Taking a look at the YouTube chat here, a lot of debate about JVR and things like that. A lot of people also declaring the Bruins winners. Tyler Mulick made a joke. It's Dmitry Orlov, or with 2 R's is how he's been looking since he came into the Bruins lineup. Yeah. McKenna, what's your take? What have you liked?
Yeah. Well, Muzzy, you took it because I love that Orlov Hathaway deal for me. I thought was unbelievable, and I totally agree. And I like what St. Louis has done at this deadline. They've really stockpiled. I thought they were going to be able to take some of those assets and flip them. You know who the big winner is for me, man, is Pierre Dorion and the Senators grabbing Jacob Chychrun. Like, for that organization to be able to pull off a trade in the midst of the team being sold, not being able to really add a ton of contract. They had to get a defenseman. Like, that team needs defense badly. And, whether you're giving up, this is probably less than what we expected for Chychrun, right? All along it was supposed to be 2 firsts and a prospect. And I think this was a good deal for the Sens, for a team that had to do something and had really tight parameters and was probably thought of to be outside the race. This was a coup for the Sens. And you look how well they've played, at least recently, and the feeling that's going on and the leadership that they already have between the young players with Brady Tkachuk and with Claude Giroux in the mix long-term. I like this, man. I think it was a home run for that team to get that player. I don't know if they're going to, like I say, playoffs, long shot this year, but they're setting the table up for that team to be better. And I didn't expect it at all. That shocked me that they got Chychrun. So it's a great play for them. I didn't expect it. Good on them.
I believe our very own Frank Seravalli had a monster quote about this, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, about it being an upper-decker grand slam, because I totally agree. I can't believe we waited 18 months for this trade to go down, And the Yotes only seem interested in picking
What
up
a
players who no
joke.
longer play the game anymore. We got Voracek, we got Shea Weber, Pronger. I mean, they got an all-star team of names on that roster, and that's a story for another day. But I'm with you on the Chychrun front. I think he really helps, and I think it means a lot to that locker room to give them a bit of a boost. Who knows if they're going to make the Stanley Cup playoffs, or from that perspective, I think they're in good hands. Obviously, you look at his age demographic too and fitting in with some of the other guys on that roster. And watch out for Timothy Stützle, man. The guy has been incredible the last couple of years. But, Tyler, I wanted to focus in as well on a team that I'm anointed.
Oh,
Go ahead,
what's up, Frank?
Go ahead.
So we've got some details on a couple trades here. For one, John Klingberg has been traded to the Minnesota Wild. This was one of those 259-59 details.
Wow.
And another trade coming down, just confirming the last little bit. I just tweeted it, but it's the Calgary Flames have gotten Troy Stecher in exchange. Troy Stecher is going to the Calgary Flames, and a brother trade is part of the package. This is really interesting. I'm told that the Calgary Flames are getting Troy Stecher and Nick Ritchie in exchange for Connor Mackey and Brett Ritchie. So the two brothers end up being traded for each other, sources say. Nice little flavor to end out trade deadline, but that is wow. John Klingberg going to the Minnesota Wild, so number 2 off our trade targets board, and a brothers trade. You almost never see that. Usually it's brothers trading to be united with each other. I guess just like Nick move into Brett's place and vice versa. Like, how does that work exactly?
Yeah, it makes it
especially
easy.
if they're wife swappers, this could be very easy. You just pack a suitcase,
Jesus.
swap bedrooms, and I mean,
This
everybody's
is the part
happy.
where
I
I
mean,
just like I'm not here
2023.
anymore.
Just get out the upside down pineapple, and here they go.
Holy shit, man. This has gone off
next
the rails.
on the DF on daily faceoffs, trade deadline wish list for next year, a filter for Jay Rosehill potentially. No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to pull the trigger on that. Okay,
You've been watching too much TLC, buddy.
yeah,
There's a
you've
reason we're
scrambled
not on
my-
network television, boys. We're connecting with the actual fans.
That actually
That's
happened
fair.
with my next door neighbors, but like for real, 2 relationships that swapped. I'm not kidding.
I'm talking about John Klingberg. I'm taking over the show here. John Klingberg's going to the Minnesota Wild. We got to break down this deal a little bit. We'll see what ends up coming back the other way. Minnesota had cap space, and it really does feel, or at least on the surface here, Minnie had some room. They moved out Greenway.
Yeah.
That probably is why they could make this thing work, as Frank said, at 259-59 ahead of the deadline. It's good, I think, right? Like, if I'm assuming Minnie didn't give up a lot here, so I'd imagine I'm going to like the deal. Nick, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's worth a flyer. And Mike and Jay, you can speak to this too. Like, Kalen Addison is the next big thing prospect in terms of defenseman, at least in that system. And they sort of given him the keys to the car to run that power play this year, but that's all he can pretty much do, right? He's very restricted defensively. Jared Spurgeon's had a chance to run that peeper. So I think at the very least, you know, it's been turbulent again for Addison and Spurgeon. I think that's the look that Minnesota was thinking, hey, let's take a flyer on this guy, right, Mike? And maybe he runs the first power play unit for that team.
No, I think that's the case. I mean, Kalen Addison has been in and out of Dean Evason's doghouse at times this year. He's been a healthy scratch before, just basically because Evason doesn't think he can play defense. And he's a young player. I think he's been really good offensively, obviously. But you look at their top 6. I mean, John Merrill's been a playoff healthy scratch previously for several teams. So I get it. I think that Klingberg is probably not a prototypical Dean Evason type of player. But if you're looking for help on power play with a team that's, and just frankly in 5-on-5 too, it's had a hard time getting up and down the ice and scoring goals if your name's not Kirill Kaprizov, this might help. So it's a 1-year thing. They can see how it works. And if not, they still have Addison there, and Merrill's good to go if they need him. Goligoski's even been in and out of the lineup too. So it's kind of an interesting setup there in Minnesota. I'm not sure how it's going to play out, but I think you can bank on having Klingberg in that lineup.
Yeah, and Minnesota's power play has actually been pretty decent this season, just looking at the numbers. Top 10 on the year, top 10 since January 1 as well, but never bad to have a little insurance piece. And again, I feel like this is one of those things where if you're Minnesota, you had the money, right? Like Frank always says, you can't take it with you. So why, if you're a GM, would you want to sit there and go, I got a couple million, just going to keep it in my pocket here? Like, no, Rosie, I like this because it's like, even if he's not a perfect fit, he'll help a little bit. Go get him.
Yeah, I mean, with these GMs, I mean, their track record is going to speak for themselves, and it doesn't do anyone any service to keep cap money on the books and not do anything with it. If you can add a John Klingberg, see what you can do. I mean, we're talking about where this fits and what this means, and it's really obviously not a world beater by any means, but I'm kind of curious as to why it came down to the 11th hour. Like, what was going on? Was there a little bit of back and forth on what the cost was?
What's up, Frank?
I can actually provide you some insight. Information is just coming in. So here's what I'm told when it comes to James Van Riemsdyk and the Flyers. The Detroit Red Wings were interested and were up front with the Flyers very early in the process, saying, we'd like to acquire this player, but we need to make something else happen first. And that didn't come to pass. And so they never actually got really too deep into it to the point where an actual trade was consummated or anything like that. They sort of had agreed on general parameters and said, if we can make something else happen, this is what we'd think about doing. And in the meantime, that didn't come to pass. And then the Flyers didn't really have any other interest. It wasn't a lack of trying on their part. I'm told that the process was because of James Van Riemsdyk at $7 million, that there weren't that many teams willing to pay him to take him at $3.5 million, I'm told. So the salary cap was a pretty complicating factor when it came down to it. The number of teams that were still left in the mix that were willing to go the extra mile to pay not just the first asset, but then the second one to run it through a third-party team never materialized. So the Flyers end up holding the bag here with James Van Riemsdyk, but I mean, it's not, at least from what I can tell, through any lack of trying.
Okay, interesting insight there. And Frank, before we let you flip off your mic, anything on the return for Klingberg yet, or are we still waiting there?
Again, trickling in very slowly. You'll laugh at what I was told by text message, which was warm bodies and a pick. So it doesn't sound like John Klingberg, also at $7 million this year, got very much in return for the Anaheim Ducks, a trade that also happens at the last moment. These guys are expensive, and although Van Riemsdyk had a better year than Klingberg, this has been a disastrous year for John Klingberg. So at that price point, the Minnesota Wild, one of the very few teams in the league that have cap space and able to take on John Klingberg, say, yeah, you know what? If it's not going to cost us much, we'll add to our team. And that's where they're at. Let's see what's going back the other way. But as I said, if you would like a laugh, warm bodies and a pick. So I shall report back once I figure out who those warm bodies are.
Rosie, thoughts on
All
that?
right.
It's better than a bucket of pucks and a pair of socks.
Sure. I suppose.
What do we get for these assholes? A used puck bag?
I honestly would like to know about these GMs, like the egos. We talk about the new age players being Gen Z and millennials. It's the opposite end of the spectrum. Some of those old boys and the dinosaurs, or whatever you want to call them, are the guys at the helms of these NHL franchises. And I can just imagine it's kind of a dick measuring contest near the end of, I'm not going to budge. No, you're not going to budge. And I want this. Well, I think you'll break first, and I'm not going to break and look like the bitch. And I can't imagine the ego struggle that goes on in that last minute. I think that's got to be the reason why some of these things come down to the absolute final minute, because someone finally breaks down and, like Frank says, just shoves a warm body and a 7th round pick in whatever direction he thinks he can win a deal at.
What's up, Nick?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think because it's a different type of market than your conventional year, if you want to call it that, because we saw so much activity that I think they were sort of caught out in the dark here. And certainly, as Frank alluded to, that contract doesn't help when you're trying to move it. You're trying to get third parties involved, fourth parties involved. I just thought it was going to be tough all around, and I'm impressed that from the Anaheim perspective, they were able to do it. JVR, I'm not that surprised, I would say, with the fact that they weren't able to move him. The point I was trying to make earlier on before we were interrupted with a variety of different deals, including the wife swap there, the Nashville Predators. I've been really, really impressed by David Poile, the body of work the last couple of weeks, knowing that he's retiring, Barrie Trotz is taking over, but sort of unloading things for him and giving him some flexibility in the offseason. They move Ekholm, they move Granlund, they move Jeannot. Niederreiter went out the door as well. It opens up some flexibility for, and I was talking about this earlier, and I know I ripped on Pittsburgh a bit too hard. The YouTube chat was over arms about that, but like, I think there's a way to retool and reset Mike quicker than a team like Pittsburgh wants to do it. But I like what Nashville's done the last couple of weeks. Do you?
I do. I thought that trade for Ekholm and, only retaining the little amount they did, I thought if they could have either got a third party involved to take on some money, or if they would have retained more, that they could have gotten more in return, frankly, from Edmonton, and taking back Barrie's contract, fine. Like you're getting a good player there in terms of power play, not great defensively, but you're getting a quality player. I understand why they're moving players, and I appreciate it. I think Poile was doing the right thing here. And I think to just finally recognize that the team is not in a window here. Like they need to get some picks and prospects in the mix here was important, because I think the way he's done it is similar to how, let's say, Doug Armstrong in St. Louis and Brian McClellan in Washington have. Like they've looked at their teams objectively and said, we're not going to make the playoffs even though we're right at the edge. Or even if we sneak into the playoffs somehow, we still have to get stuff for our valuable assets. So I think that's smart. And like you said, David Poile setting the table for Barrie Trotz to come in this summer and be able to make this team and mold this team the way that he would like, which is important. You want to start off on the right foot when you get into that big chair as a general manager.
Yeah, I think that's a really solid point. The one thing that really stands out to me, and I'm interested to see, like, looking back at this deadline a year from now, we talked about the Chychrun deal, right? You gave up first a couple of seconds. I know there's a conditional there, but that's not a crazy amount to give up for an impact player under team control. You talked about the Oilers going out and getting Matthias Ekholm. Impact player under team control. And then I look at, I love the Orlov deal. I love the Bertuzzi deal as well. You're acquiring pure rentals. The Ryan O'Reilly deal, you're acquiring pure rentals. I wonder if just the amount of players on the market who had term on their deals, I wonder if that hurt the rental market at all, because some of these GMs, like let's say Ken Holland, he might have looked at a Gavrikov and said, he's fine, but I don't want to be the guy giving up a first-round pick, having him walk, and then a few months into the summer, I'm sitting there going, well, damn, maybe that didn't work out. Like, if you get guys with term, I just think you have more of a runway for it to not bite you in the ass.
Yeah, it feels like some of these guys, with the rental market, I've seen so many times there. I was kind of surprised at how much salary is retained by multiple teams. I mean, more than once we saw, guys getting a player of value with 75% of their salary retained. I mean, that's huge. You feel like you're getting this guy for an absolute steal. And, the Muppets and the clowns of the NHL, like the Arizona Coyotes, are just hoggling on hundreds of or tens of millions of dollars for reasons unknown why they're even available to be in that position. But it makes teams more apt to take that rental and say, let's see what we can do here. But when that guy's got 2 or 3 years left on $6 and $7 million, that's a whole different conversation as far as what kind of commitment you're giving to that player and how much it's going to cost you down the road.
Mm-hmm. Alex, let's flash up. Let's go through the top 10 here and see some of the names that maybe didn't get moved, because I got a question for the group about that as well. JVR sitting at number 1, pending UFA. I mean, I think we're all looking there at a guy who's likely going to walk to unrestricted free agencies. The Flyers team that's, probably going to be middling out again, won't be too interested in that. Kevin Hayes, term on the deal. Brock Besser, term on the deal. As we go through numbers 6 through 10 as well, a guy in there, Colton Parayko. He's got term on his deal as well. When you maybe consider those three, let's throw in a guy like JT Miller to the mix as well. Who's a name that didn't get moved at the deadline? I'll start with you on this one, Mike McKenna. Who's a name that didn't get moved at the deadline that you're really interested to see their situation play out into the summer?
I think Hayes fits that mix very well because, let's face it, I don't think him and Torts are on great standing. And if you're trying to find a centerman and free agency, right, it's the same mix as you basically had now. Like Horvat's even off the board, so you're kind of looking at O'Reilly, and that's about it, really. So I think he's one. Like I said, Dumba was the one that I was a little surprised with, just in some ways. But I think you can go down the list with players in Philly, even Ivan Provorov, who was number 15 on our list here at Daily Faceoff. What plays out there? It's a pretty quality player, but which team would actually want to take him on right now? I honestly think that he's probably kryptonite for a lot of teams. They don't want to take him on.
Probably.
So Hayes is the one for me that contract, it's still a really effective player that, like I say, I think when that contract was signed, it's just over $7 million per season. That was an awful lot we thought for a second line center, but that has now come back to being much more in line with what the market is. So I think that, and really looking throughout the rest of the people in our trade list here, man, there's not any other ones. Connor Garland's one. I wonder what happens with him. He doesn't seem to fit Vancouver. He was a past regime signing. I thought he was good. I think under Tocchet, it probably fits a little better. But if they're trying to create cap flexibility, is he a guy that goes? So he's another one to keep an eye on.
I was going to go ahead.
I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about number 10 on the list there, Justin Holl. I mean, this untouchable guy. I just don't understand why a guy that brings just like very little. He has his downsides as far as defensive breakdowns and whatnot. He moves the puck okay. He certainly is hardly ever physical, yet he is just this consummate staple in this lineup that now has 9, legit NHL defensemen on it, and there is absolutely no sign of him being taken out of the lineup. And I was a little bit upset the other night where all of a sudden he shows that he's capable and willing to be physical as long as it it suits him personally, because all of a sudden his back's against the wall, which it hasn't even been close to against the wall all year long. He's got a free pass in the lineup. Now you think maybe things will change. He decides to show, maybe I'll start hitting guys. I'll put McDavid on his ass and Yamamoto and fight a guy. And although he didn't do good in that as a kind of irrelevant, it's like you just started doing that now. And now that, it seems like he's a staple there for whatever reason within that organization, they're not going to take him out. Now he's going to go back to just playing his mediocre ways. And that's frustrating to me. I can't understand why he is such a staple there.
Can you mention?
Yeah, it really feels like
or the other night.
Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Well, he kind of fought. Someone else fought against him, more like, but
he got beat up by Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. So
if a guy drops his gloves, I always give him respect. The hardest thing is to drop your glove. Go ahead, Frank.
Just some details here. The official trade for John Klingberg going from Anaheim to the Minnesota Wild. Joe Smith from The Athletic, all over the details. The Minnesota Wild are sending a 4th-round pick in 2025. Minor league defenseman Andre Schuster and the rights to Nesterenko. So, as I mentioned, not a whole ton of a lot of value materializing for the Anaheim Ducks in the last hours for John Klingberg. But number 2 from the trade targets board, John Klingberg off to Minnesota. It's such an interesting deadline. You guys were just talking about Minnesota. We were thinking this team, at varying points, could they potentially be a seller? And they do move Jordan Greenway, but on the back end, they keep Matt Dumba. They bring a new piece in John Klingberg, and this team has actually played a lot better of late. The West is sort of bananas. As much as we've looked at the East as a steel cage death match, the West is more or less wide open. Depends on what you think of Colorado and their health level and all those things, but man, like to say that Minnesota doesn't have a chance to compete with Dallas or with Winnipeg or whoever else coming out of the Central, aside from Colorado, like it seems that they're right there in the mix.
Interesting stuff, Frank. So it almost feels like maybe a situation where the Ducks were like, hey, I mean, obviously get them for anything and maybe do right by the player. Say, hey, go play some competitive hockey down the stretch as well and try to regain some amount of value. Nick, I'll come to you quickly here. I'll let you give your take on which player you're watching closest going into the summer and also your maybe final thoughts on that Klingberg return.
Yeah, I would say Brock Besser is probably the name I'm watching and monitoring very closely. Again, it's just unique to me that we're talking about Vancouver being a supposed seller and rebuilder, and like the only big move they pretty much made, aside from obviously the Horvat stuff a couple weeks back, was like adding Philip Hronek for a gross price on a guy having a breakout season, if you want to call it that. So with lofty expectations moving forward, and we don't know how it's going to turn out in Vancouver. So you look at Brock Besser, I mean, it's quite clear the player would love a change of scenery. It's quite clear that they don't foresee him in their game plan over the, X amount of years, and they can't find a culmination to this saga. So I think we carry that on to the offseason, and that's the curious thing to me, aside from Philadelphia, and I shared my thoughts on them. Vancouver, what does that team look like in, say, like 6 months from now?
Yeah, fair enough. We'll come back to our main panel in just a little bit here, but I want to check in. We'll get grades from Matt Larkin as well in a couple of minutes as well. But let's check in with Pete Blackburn one last time from Bally Sports. Pete, this deadline period, I think, will be summed up by some of the loading up we saw in the East with Boston and Jersey and the Rangers. That'll sum up deadline period. Deadline day will be summed up John Klingberg for a fourth and Andre Suster. JVR goes nowhere. That's the kind of day we had.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad that something went for Klingberg, right? Because I was about to throw both of them into this sort of the same category where it's like, what the hell are you doing by holding on to these guys? And, maybe I could make more sense of Klingberg staying in Anaheim if they wanted to keep him beyond this year. But like JVR not being traded by Philly makes zero sense to me. Even if you get like dog crap for him, it's dog crap that has an opportunity to turn into something. Maybe if you get super lucky, you get zero benefit by hanging on to him. And it just makes no sense. I think that it's an extenuation of Chuck Fletcher really not being active. And I know Frank said, like, it wasn't for a lack of trying, but trying without results has been the story of Chuck Fletcher over the past few years, going back to even like the Johnny Gaudreau sweepstakes. We couldn't get Johnny Gaudreau because we have too many bad contracts and we couldn't fit him in. Well, why is that, Chuck? Because you signed bad contracts and you didn't work hard enough to get him off the books. So the trying only gets you so far. And some of the excuses that are probably going to come out after this are just not good enough.
The other side, like, again, Fletcher, yes, this is a brutal look to not get this guy out of here and get something back in for him. I also kind of look around at maybe not so much Minnesota, but kind of at Minnesota too. Seattle Kraken had cap space. The Winnipeg Jets, I'm looking at cap friendly, had a bit of cap space. What about some of these teams who could have used scoring help, who made other moves? Like if you're the Jets, why not just don't get Namestnikov, smoke out the Flyers, send a mid-round pick to them, get JVR, get a better player? The Kraken could have used scoring help. The Wild, you went and got Johansson and Nyquist. Why not go get JVR and use the cap space you had? I'm a little bit confused by some of these teams who maybe weren't as aggressive in their pursuit, I guess, if I'm right on that read.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I guess it just comes down to, what was the price and what was the prohibitive, okay, we're not doing this in terms of a team like Winnipeg or a team like Vegas. And, obviously JVR is a guy that can fit in on a lot of these teams, especially down the stretch and in the playoffs where you do want that net front presence. You want a guy in the dirty areas who's going to help out, and he's got a veteran presence. He's well liked. So like there's got to be a reason why he didn't move, whether it was the price or just Chuck Fletcher, I guess, just being not so good at his job, maybe. I don't know. It's something that we've got to figure out, and I want to know more details as to why it didn't happen.
Pete, it was a pleasure getting to chat with you throughout this deadline show. We made it. Somehow we made it. We're now 3.5 hours deep, but we loved having you around. Thanks for hopping in again this year, man.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
There you go. That is Pete Blackburn from Bally Sports.
Just some further context here. Flyers GM Chuck Fletcher telling Pierre LeBrun on the record that he did not receive a firm offer from any team on James Van Riemsdyk. Says they spoke with one team about a trade concept. That would be the Detroit Red Wings. I'm putting that in parentheses. But as I reported, it was conditional on that team making another move, and that move didn't happen. And so he didn't get traded. You guys can crush him all you want. I'm not defending him. All I'm saying is if you don't get an offer, what are you supposed to do?
Well, that was kind of my point there to Pete at the end was like, as much as everyone's going to rag on Fletcher, I kind of sit there and go, what were some teams doing here who could have used a guy who, like you've said, Frank, he's a lock for 20 goals every year. He could have scored you goals down the stretch. Does that surprise you that some teams weren't more involved in this?
Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking is if you are Vegas and you have cap space today, and if you are, I don't know, pick another team. If you're the Tampa Bay Lightning, if you are the Seattle Kraken, all these teams that have cap space that didn't end up using it, like, why wouldn't you go out and do what the Minnesota Wild did and go out and add John Klingberg at the end basically for free 99? It's what the Carolina Hurricanes did last year with Max Domi. When you find a market inefficiency of someone else not trading for a guy and you can add a 20-goal scorer, like, how do you know if you're the Boston Bruins and Taylor Hall's knee is no good? Or Nick Foligno can't come back for the playoffs. Like, I'm not saying the Bruins needed to add more because they did enough. All I'm saying is if there's an opportunity there at the very end, like, I mean, if you're not getting any offers, I don't know what you can do is my only point. And the fact that other teams weren't more in the mix, it does surprise me a little bit because I think he is a good player that as a net front scorer has real utility when space becomes shrunk in the playoffs and it's harder to score.
Yeah. Just before we send you back up to your corner here in your Athletic Brewing Insider Camp, Frank, are you expecting any other moves trickling down? Or you think we're done?
I'm pretty sure that's it. Did you guys cover the Dante Fabro contract extension with the Nashville Predators? A pending restricted free agent. He signs a 1-year, $2.5 million deal. The Preds had obviously perused the market for Fabro in the days leading up to the deadline, ultimately decide to keep him on a 1-year deal, get that business out of the way before the summer. Short of that, not expecting any whoppers to come down the pike, but it was around this time, was it last year? I think it was 2 years ago. It was the Anthony Mantha for Jacob Vrana absolute jaw dropper that got filed into Central Registry at the last minute. A deal I can confidently say now both teams would like to have back.
Yeah, no kidding. That was a stunner back on that deadline. Coming so late, no one even had a sniff of it until it happened. We'll check in with Frank one more time here before the end of the show. We are 38 minutes post deadline, but like Frank said, seems like we're at the end, which means we can check in one more time with Matt Larkin for some trade grades to put a wrap on a few things. Mr. Larkin, you have your grading pencil out. Let's start with the very, very rare brother swap. Nick and Brett switching spots in that deal. Troy Stecher, Connor Mackey going the other way. Grade this bad boy up.
If you told me this morning that on the show we'd have a wife swap discussion and a brother swap discussion, I would not have believed you. This trade, Tyler, it's a bit of a head scratcher for me from Arizona's standpoint. It's not like they got anyone who's a bankable prospect. Connor Mackey, obviously, he did climb the prospect board for the Calgary Flames, signed out of college, but he's 26 years old. I kind of feel like we know who he is at this point. He's a quad-A defenseman. He's effective in the AHL. He can move the puck. But if you're the Coyotes, you're full scorched earth right now. And I don't see how you wouldn't be trying to get picks in this deal. It's not like Connor Mackey's contract is going to cost enough. It's going to be helping you with your salary floor situation. So it's a D- for me from the Coyotes. I just feel like they should have looked for future assets rather than someone who's already in his prime or close to the end of his prime. From the Calgary Flames, I get it. I think they understood who they were this year. It just seems like with Daryl Sutter, that's the kind of coach that has a shelf life. It's just like Mike Keenan back in the day, John Tortorella, these taskmasters, they can lose a room and suddenly it's not fun to play there. The team starts to sag. The chemistry is a bit wrong this year. So they're not going to be able to take a big swing. They're not close enough to a playoff spot. That said, they still have enough talent on that roster to add something, to give them a shot to squeak in as the 8th seed. Troy Stecher, good defensive depth, can move the puck. Nick Ritchie, arguably a rich man's Brett Ritchie, rich man's version of his own brother. He brings some size. He can score a little bit. And I don't mind the trade. To me, it's a C. It's fine. And I think it's the right mentality for Brad Treliving. He understood this is not the year to take a big swing. Last year, they were real cup contenders. This year, they're not.
Fair enough. And we'll wrap this up with the guy who was number 2 on our trade targets board. John Klingberg going to the Minnesota Wild for a package that involves a fourth, the rights to Nikita Nesterenko and Anaheim, or Andre Suster as well, sorry, and they keep 50% of Klingberg's deal. Recap this one for us.
Yeah, from Minnesota's perspective, obviously the acquisition cost is fine. So it's paying very little to get someone who can move the puck. He obviously has slipped a lot defensively since the prime of his career, John Klingberg. At the same time, are you really getting anything you didn't already have with Kalen Addison? Addison is much younger. He has the same sort of skill set. He's been a bit of a liability on defense. He can be your power play quarterback, right shot. Klingberg has not been very good this season. You're kind of getting the same player. Going to push Addison further down the depth chart and limit his opportunities. So it's fine. I think it's a low risk move for the Minnesota Wild. I give them a C, and I'm going to end it off with the only F- of the day. So I want to put this in context. If you're the Anaheim Ducks last summer, you signed John Klingberg for $7 million. If you thought at the time that $7 million was going to buy you a 4th round pick, I think that would be devastating news. So just the plan that was clearly in place when they signed him to that 1-year deal, it totally backfired for Pat Verbeek, and it's pretty disappointing that the return is so minuscule. So factoring in the cost in the summer, I got to hand out an F-.
I like the negativity. I like calling someone out. Any other team you look at around the league and go, you're getting an F for your work in deadline period?
I'm very disappointed in the Carolina Hurricanes. And you can say, hey, how could they take a swing when there are no other major pieces out there? Ryan O'Reilly was off the board. Timo Meier was off the board. But you got to find a way for Don Waddell. We saw on Frank's podcast last week, I think it was, Tom Dundon was talking about being aggressive. This team is the best the Carolina Hurricanes have ever had. If you look at their points percentage, their pace, they're one of the only teams that could have kept pace with Boston. You got to take your swing. And I think the Canes, they had that cap space to use with Max Pacioretty. And they don't do anything big. They get Ghost Bear, that's fine. They get Jesse Puljujarvi, that's fine. That's not what they needed. They needed a marquee player, a top 6 scorer to replace what Pacioretty had. And I know it's hard to find out there. If the market wasn't right, there wasn't the right player they wanted to get. I don't care. No excuses. You're a top cup contender. Don Waddell, you have to go out and get something to keep pace, because everybody in your own division, the Metro, you got Bo Horvat joining your division. You have Vladimir Tarasenko joining your division. Patrick Kane is joining your division. Timo Meier is joining your division. And then, of course, Boston and Toronto are loading up. Carolina, a bit of a deer in the headlights, minor acquisitions. And I think when I publish later today my trade deadline winners and losers on dailyfaceoff.com, Carolina is the team I'm going to be picking on.
Matt Larkin, fantastic stuff today. Loved the trade grades throughout the day. And if you want more takes from Matt, he will be, like he said, publishing some on dailyfaceoff.com. There will be a lot going up on the site in the next 24 hours here. Thanks for hopping on as many times as you did, Matt.
My pleasure, man. You killed it today. No bathroom breaks. I can't believe it.
Dude, I am struggling right now, but we are going to grind our way till the end of the show. Luckily, you can't see like here down. Who knows? I might have been relieving myself into a water bottle a few times. It's between me and absolutely no one. Let's bring back the main panel here and do a quick little wrap up before the end of the show. And I know I'm absolutely throwing you a curveball here, our technical producer, Alex Allard, who has been killing it today as well. But I see Pete Blackburn's chilling there as well. Maybe we can mix in Pete as I give sort of some rapid fire roundup questions here for the end of the day. Let's do this. One word to define today's trade deadline day. I want it summed up really quick, and I'll start with you, Nick Alberga. We didn't even get to 20 trades. Give me one word to recap today.
Uneventful, right?
Fair enough.
We expected that. The last 2 weeks has been insane. It's pretty much what I expected, and I put out there, stop bitching on Twitter about being a slow day. Like, we got so much activity. I want to credit the GMs out there for their creativity. It was the most epic deadline season, I think, since I've been covering the league in the last 12 years. So I walk away happy with this broadcast and also the last couple weeks.
Rosie, one word to describe deadline day?
Brotherly love. Brotherly
that's
love
2 words.
comes to mind.
That's 2, but we'll give it to you.
It's a phrase. It's a phrase. It's a phrase. And reminds me of the Ritchie brothers and their situation right now. I don't know how close they are, but it's nice when things go hand in hand. And it reminds me, to talk about what you guys mentioned with the Philadelphia Flyers situation. And it's interesting to say that, he sits there and he goes, I didn't get any offers. What do you want me to do? And as analysts and fans and everything else on the outside, we look and we just assume that over the weeks coming up to the deadline, there's offers being entertained and shut down, and hey, keep this in your back pocket, and hey, remember me when we're going down the barrel. And sometimes that stuff just doesn't happen. And if a deal doesn't get done at the 11th hour, you're thinking, oh, he must be regretting not taking the early deals that he was offered, and man, he asked too much and XYZ. But sometimes teams are dealing with all kinds of things, and you just kind of are the odd man out. And a Kevin Hayes just sits there and goes, I didn't get any real offers. I was open, my ears were there, but nothing happens. So you got to keep that in mind too, as the deadline actually comes and goes, that maybe just things weren't on the table for certain players and certain GMs to make the deal happen.
Mike?
Yeah, and I'll just say lackluster. I know there'd been an incredible amount of movement leading up to the deadline, but I was hopeful that it would still continue in terms of the chaos factor of it all, because there were decent players still available. But to say that you didn't get offers on somebody also makes me wonder what you set the market at to begin with. You have to have a conversation. And if you set the market too high to begin with, no one's going to talk to you or make an offer. So I kind of don't, I have a hard time buying that, but you never know unless you're in the room. And man, we beat up Chuck Fletcher, and I love that guy. He's done things for my family on a personal level that was amazing. It's just the results in Philly are so disappointing, and you just want better for that fan base and the team in general. So to get away from Philly, I think that it was just somewhat lackluster today, but we did expect it. It wasn't a big surprise to us. I just think some of the names that remained on the board were probably more surprising, I think, than the total amount of trades that actually took place.
And I will send you guys away. Awesome work over 3 hours and what's now been 3 hours and 47 minutes. But we will be the cliche panel here, gents. We now know the rosters. We know what the playoff races are. Let's do our Stanley Cup final predictions now that deadline day has passed. Nick Alberga, give me who you think's going all the way to the final two this year.
All right. Again, it's tough because I cover the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I can't look past the Boston Bruins as Rosie shudders his eyes. Fuck you. It's going to be Colorado and Boston in my Stanley Cup final. The Bruins just seem like a team of destiny, but ultimately I can't look past the Colorado Avalanche repeating as Cup champs. We've seen it a couple times in the last decade already. Got McKinnon. The hope is Landeskog's going to be back. Nichushkin's healthy. They got Makar. So I'm going to go Colorado over Boston in my Stanley Cup final. Who do you have at Rose Hill?
Well, it's no surprise why the Leafs struggle to have success so much when their fan base is so goddamn negative, the same as you are every day, in and out, Nick Alberga. But I got the Toronto Maple Leafs putting it together, finding some jam, finding some chemistry. They're well-rounded. They're goaltenders who everyone's shitting on the last 5 days when they've been fantastic all year long. Their numbers are good. They switch hit, they ham and egg it. And if they even find that little playoff bump, either one of them, they could make a difference. And I have this weird feeling that the Boston Bruins aren't going to go all the way. Something's going to happen. The wheels are going to fall off. Allmark will get hurt or something, and then the whole thing's over. Everyone thinks it's an absolute lock. And I do like your pick in the West with the Colorado Avalanche, with them kind of almost sneaking in as an underdog this year, not having immediate success, but I can see their experience and veteran leadership and everything else with those guys and what they have under their belt could actually prevail come down the barrel here.
McKenna.
So I'll take this right off the bat. I already said the Dallas Stars are going to win the whole thing. They're just going to waltz right in the back door and win it. And you know why I'm actually not kidding around about them coming out of the West? This is Jake Ottinger's better than any goalie out there. I don't trust Georgiev in Colorado. Francouz has been hurt. That makes me nervous, and just the health of that team. Okay, so that's my deal on the West. In the East, I think it's a two-horse race between Boston and Carolina. I would take Carolina if they would have made one big addition here at the line that they didn't make. And that's why I don't think they're going to be there. I got a bold prediction for Carolina, though. I think Pyotr Kochetkov is going to end up in the net in the Stanley Cup playoffs for that team somehow, some way. And he's going to be sick. Okay? He's going to be sick for that team.
Who do you wish they added,
I know
Mike?
It's the easy pick. I thought
Carolina
Horvat was the guy that they needed. I thought they needed Horvat, and that was even before the Pacioretty deal. He was the guy that they needed. They needed center help. They needed power play help. He was the guy. They didn't get him. So if that wasn't the case, you could have pivoted to Meyer, and he, they didn't make it happen there either. So I'm going to go Boston. Like they're just so stacked, man. And I do appreciate if Allmark goes down, I'm a little nervous with Swayman. But top to bottom, the deals that Sweeney made at the deadline to make that team even better. Bertuzzi, I've seen Bertuzzi win a Calder Cup against me in 2018, right? Or 2017, like with Grand Rapids Griffins. The guy's built for playoffs. He's going to be hungry as can be once he gets there.
Fuck, they're so good.
They're deep.
Yeah.
They are deep, the
Good.
beasts of the East right now. It'll be really fun. Jay Rosehill and Nick Alberga, Leafs Morning Take, Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, the Nation Network YouTube. Also, if you're a Leafs fan watching this stream, go subscribe to the Leafs Nation on YouTube as well, because they have a ton of great interviews that drop on that show. Mike McKenna, you can find his work at dailyfaceoff.com. He'll also be back, Daily Faceoff Live. This is an everyday show, Monday to Friday, noon Eastern, 30 minutes of commercial-free straight hockey talk here on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, and Mike is a big part of that. Gentlemen, you three were outstanding over the last 4 hours here. It was a ton of fun grinding through that deadline day with you guys. And to wrap up today's show, we're going to bring back our friend Frank Seravalli, activating the Athletic Brewing Insider Cam for one more hit. And I'll take a little sip here, Frank. That is good stuff. That is good stuff. And actually, Frank, I know you don't like, we got to wait till things are confirmed, but I am actually seeing a trade and a deal coming down right now. Reports are you are in the finishing stages of acquiring a good night's sleep.
Yes, that is confirmed. It's been a bunch of short nights this week, and you guys were talking about the activity and how, it kind of built up to a letdown today. And I think that's fair to explain the entire market, but let me throw this number at you. We do our trade targets boards starting in December, and usually they start around 25 guys, ramp up to 50 at some point during the deadline. And we had 41 players traded off of our trade targets board. That's just our board. Wow. 41 out of 50. So if you think about that in overall terms, the activity was ridiculous the last few weeks, and it wasn't that there weren't players left. It was that there weren't impact players left with holes on rosters to fill them. And so, today's, developments end up being a little bit of a letdown. There's a suspense factor that came into play, sort of late with James Van Riemsdyk and the Flyers, and also John Klingberg going to Minnesota. But certainly lots that happened and lots that was surprising in a lot of ways, based on teams like Detroit selling and St. Louis and Washington being really definitive in their actions, and Boston loading up even when you think they might be done. They add Tyler Bertuzzi and Brad Marchand light. So it was a fascinating deadline period, if not a fascinating deadline day. And got to say to you guys on the panels, to Pete and to Tyler, you navigating us as our captain and steering the ship for us, and everyone behind the scenes that makes everything work at dailyfaceoff.com. It's a team effort, and there was so much that happened to pull off a show like this, 4 hours streaming live. And so I'm incredibly proud of the content that we created in this deadline countdown series, and looking forward to doing it again next year.
Yeah, Frank. And before we officially wrap, I think one final fitting question for you, if you'd allow me to nerd out on the trade talk for one more. When you put out the first trade targets list post deadline, looking ahead to what could happen in the summer, who would you expect to be up near the top there?
Oh, man.
Or who's at the top?
I actually don't know the answer. I'd have to think about it, but the Flyers were really motivated today to try and move Kevin Hayes. I'll say that. And that one didn't end up materializing, but the Flyers think that Hayes at $4.5 million is a really valuable player in this league. They're willing to retain that much. And so he'd be one guy certainly to keep an eye on. I think there's other guys in the Flyers that, John Tortorella called this a fact-finding mission this season. And, what they figured out is that not everyone that's there is compatible with their coach. And the coach has never had more power than he does in Philly. And that means the players are going to be going the other way. So they're one team to watch. And here's the other thing I'll say to set up the summer, which feels so far away today, is that the UFA market is so thin that you're going to see teams really be interested in someone like JT Miller. Teams that are trying to make an impact and improve their team. JT Miller, say what you want about him, still a point per game player. He's just probably a misfit and miscast in Vancouver. And if he's somewhere else, you probably view JT Miller through a bit of a different prism. So I would say JT Miller is going to be at the very top of some trade targets boards come April, May, and June.
It will be nonstop action in the summer. That's going to be fun. Until then, we have a playoff race to get ready for, and that means Daily Faceoff Live is going to be just as exciting for us here today. Yes, sir. That Athletic Bruin, that crack sounds good. For us here, it was a 4-hour grind. For Frank Seravalli, it is a 4-week-plus grind on deadline day, so no one deserves that cold one more than Mr. Seravalli. For our panel today, the Players Room, Mike McKenna and Jay Rosehill. Instant reaction with Nick Alberga, Pete Blackburn stopping in with Pete's Take a bunch of times, Matt Larkin on the trade grades. A big shout out to Tyson Barrie for joining us as well today on the show. Behind the scenes, there are people who make this thing work. Gavin Turnick was on socials. Liam Horobin and Brendan Bradley made this show look as good as it did from a graphics perspective. And I'll use a baseball term here. Alex Allard pitched what I'd call a perfect game on this broadcast here today. It was flawless, in my opinion, from start until the end. So for Frank Seravalli, the entire team at Daily Faceoff, thanks to the north of 50,000 people who tuned in to today's broadcast. We appreciate it more than you know. Keep it locked. The journey doesn't stop here. Daily Faceoff Live back on Monday. Daily Faceoff still with you for the rest of the hockey season. Thanks for tuning in today, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.